IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Wednesday, which means we're about halfway through the week, getting ready for Notre Dame versus Texas A&M. Notre Dame enters sort of a Wednesday practice period today, which is sort of it's kind of the big week, the big day. It's your last full practice or full padded practice. It's your last day where you're doing more team situations, and then of course tomorrow, Thursday, is a lot of situational football. Friday will be travel day, walkthroughs, and then Saturday's game day. So Notre Dame is getting closer and closer to being where they need to be to know whether or not this team is going to be ready to go out there and win this football game on Saturday. So it's a big one, obviously, from a perception standpoint. I'm going to have a show on Friday. I'm going to go live on Friday, and one of the things I'm going to talk about is what does this game mean for Notre Dame? Because there's a very interesting debate going on where, especially on the board, and I'm assuming it's on other channels as well. I don't read that, and I'm not on social media as much as I used to be. This notion that all of a sudden, Texas A&M is this loaded, talented team, and people in the chat that are obsessed with recruiting rankings and all these other type of things, and it's going to be this and it's going to be that, and all this hand-wringing and complaining about how Notre Dame doesn't win games like this and A&M is really good. And then you point out, like, hey, they beat NC State, they beat Duke, they beat Syracuse, and they're like, oh, those teams suck. And the reality is all three of those teams have better record than Texas A&M in the last 2 years. And so there needs to be a proper understanding of what this game means. It is a big game. I'll dive more into it during the week. It is a big game. It is an important game for Notre Dame. It's not an end-all, be-all game for Notre Dame, win or lose. And beating Texas A&M does not mean that you're now going to go beat Georgia or Ohio State. They are not that program. Losing to Texas A&M doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It's not good. There's no good spin, but as I've said before, we've seen teams win championships the same season they lost to teams that are just like A&M, if not worse, right? I mean, Clemson, the first year they won the title, lost at home in November to an 8-5 Pitt team. And if you look at 17 Clemson, who made the college football playoff as number 1 seed, lost on the road to a 4-8 Syracuse. Ohio State in 2014 lost at home by 2 touchdowns in September to a Virginia Tech team that finished 7-6. This game is not the end of the world whether you lose, and it does not mean bring on Georgia, bring on Ohio State when you win. This is a game that will be a battle. This is a good football team. Yes, they have talent. So does Notre Dame. Yes, they have good coaches. So does Notre Dame. This is an opportunity for Notre Dame to go out there and make a statement. And unfortunately, in my opinion, the biggest statement that needs to be made is to some Notre Dame fans who just, for whatever reason, have just convinced themselves that this is just a game that it's going to be almost impossible to win. I don't agree. And I'm going to talk about some of those reasons why today. And then, of course, tomorrow we'll have our prediction show. But I got to admit, I've been disappointed at how much negativity there is among the Notre Dame fan base heading into this game. I'm actually shocked by it. I really thought that Notre Dame fans were going to be more excited. I think Notre Dame fans I thought they would be more of, hey, yeah, you got to show me. I mean, I'm in show me mode. Marcus Freeman's got a lot to prove. The Notre Dame coaching staff has got a lot to prove. Notre Dame players have got a lot to prove. But man, if you're not excited now, it's disappointing, to be completely honest with you, that there's been that much of that. And maybe it's just that the negative people are the loudest and most people are encouraged. But I just don't understand, there even someone in the chat right now talking about A&M's rankings or this. Like, if you're constantly going to be looking for the things to be upset about and sad about and disappointed about, it's like, dude, I mean, that's a you problem. You might want to talk to somebody about that. You know what I mean? And they got more 5 stars. They also have almost twice as many 3 stars or unranked players in their starting lineup as what Notre Dame has. So if you want to look for something to be upset about, you're going to find it most weeks. And we're not going to do that. We're not going to have emotional arguments today at Notre Dame. We're going to have factual ones, and we'll give analysis and opinions, and you'll know the difference between what is fact and what is opinion as we dive into today's show. And today's show is going to be it's a midweek rundown, so we kind of go through a lot of different things. Part 1 and part 2 are going to be looking at the on-paper matchup between Notre Dame and Texas A&M. which is made increasingly harder when you look at not only game one. It's always difficult to sort of do a statistical analysis of the first game of the year because teams are naturally different from what they were in previous seasons. It's even more difficult nowadays because so many teams are in situations where they're just their rosters are completely different, not only just from like it has in the past where you have to replace some guys, but you just have this giant influx of portal guys. What makes this matchup even more challenging is the idea that you've got 3 new coordinators in this game. Notre Dame has a new offensive coordinator, and obviously Texas A&M has 2 new coordinators on defense and obviously at on the offensive side of the ball. And that's another area where there's this kind of this panic about how good Colin Klein was at Kansas State. And he was, while ignoring the fact that Notre Dame brought in the offensive coordinator who led the #1 offense in the country last year. But I'm to believe, according to some, that Colin Klein's going to have a huge impact on Texas A&M's offense. But Mike Denbrock coming to Notre Dame is not going to have much of an impact because reasons. So that's just been kind of what I've been dealing with today. So, yeah, I'm a little bit kind of done with it, to be honest with you. So I'm going to be a little bit chippy today. I'm just letting you guys know because it's kind of struck my last nerve, to be completely honest with you. That doesn't mean I'm guaranteeing Notre Dame is going to win the game. Of course Notre Dame could lose this game. It's just the constant focus on negativity that I'm seeing, and I don't quite get where it comes from. Right? Like if they lose, then be negative, then focus on what happened when they lose. But how about enjoy these last moments before the season starts? That's what I'm going to do. And then we can deal with whatever happens on Saturday when it happens, and we can deal with it. So that's kind of where I'm at about where this team is going to be. So we're going to stack up those things. Part 3 and part 4 of the show are going to be looking at game wreckers. It's going to be a discussion of who are the players for Notre Dame that I think need to be the game wreckers for this matchup. And it's something that I'm going to do kind of on all the Wednesday shows. I think it's going to be a little bit of a different look of the guys that I think, whether it be talent-wise or matchup-wise, need to be those impact players for Notre Dame. And then on the same side is who are the players for Texas A&M's defense that you need to make sure don't become game wreckers for them. And it's not always the same. It's not always this guy versus this guy. You know, my game wreckers may be these guys, but they may not be matched up against the game wreckers for the other team. And then part 4, we'll be looking at it from the opposite side. It'll be the Notre Dame defense, and then looking at it from the standpoint of the Texas A&M offense and who they need to stop. And then the final segment of today's show will be our buy, sell, hold. As always, the buy, sell, hold is on Wednesday. Is going to be at the end of the show. This is going to kind of start the time of the year when the buy, sell, hold will not be every submission gets responded to, because otherwise I'll be doing a 5-hour show, and I just don't have the voice to do a 5-hour show. So I picked some of the ones, like there were some that were really good, but they were more like down the road thinking to 2025, and I'm just not quite ready there. So a lot of great submissions that I had to turn down today, which I do never feel great about, but you know, we have to, I have a lot of work to get done the next couple days before I fly down to Texas, and I just didn't feel like I could do a 5-hour show today. But I promise you there's going to be lots of good stuff in today's show, lots of discussion, and then I'll, of course, get to your guys' great submissions at the end for our buy, sell, hold. So I want to kick off part 1 of today's show with a discussion about the matchup, on paper matchup between Notre Dame and Texas A&M. And the on paper matchup is then built around the guys that are actually playing, right? And I'm going to try my best to give some really good context to this conversation because, as I said, it is a challenge to do this type of thing in week 1 anyway. And it's even more challenging when you're trying to do it with so much turnover from all these teams. You know, your Notre Dame coaches talked about it, but I mean, just thinking off the top of my head, if you're trying to evaluate the players that you're going to go against, you're not only watching Texas A&M film to evaluate the players that are coming back, and then the Duke film to evaluate what they did defensively. And then you also have to evaluate Kansas State film to see what Colin Klein did there. You may want to evaluate some Florida film under Jay Bateman, but I don't know that I'd spend a whole lot of time evaluating the Florida film. You have to consider evaluating Louisiana Tech film to watch Cyrus Allen. You have to watch Kansas State film on defense to evaluate Will Lee. You have to watch UAB film. You have to watch Florida film. I mean, there's so much film you have to watch of Kansas from O-line, Utah for the O-line. There's so much that you have to evaluate when looking at this type of thing. And it's the same thing that's true for Texas A&M to a degree, although the head coach obviously has a pretty good idea about a couple of the main transfers from Notre Dame as far as what they can do. So it's going to be very interesting to see kind of how this holds up and or how this shakes out. But I do think there are some baseline discussions that we can have about this statistical matchup. And so we'll get things started by looking at the Notre Dame offense against the Texas A&M defense. So there's two reasons why I'm starting on this side of the ball. Number one is I normally start on offense. I'm an offensive guy. The other one is this is obviously the matchup that has got people talking the most. And this is the matchup that has people the most angst. I don't know a lot of Notre Dame fans, even the most pessimistic ones, who are thinking that A&M is just going to go out there and rip Notre Dame up. I mean, that's just not happening a whole lot. There are some concerns, obviously, about the Notre Dame defense from new linebackers and this guy, because apparently Notre Dame's the only team in college football that lost starters from last year and lost starters to the NFL. So that's obviously going to make winning tough, apparently, this year because nobody else lost anyone to the NFL last year, apparently. I'm sorry, I'm being a little salty today. It's just going to happen. You're just going to have to accept it. But or I hope that you can accept it, I should say. But looking at this matchup with the Notre Dame offense and the Texas A&M defense, and the run game is a very intriguing matchup. Even as much as yes, NY List says, yes, Brian, you are offensive. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. I am an offensive guy. There's no doubt about it. But looking at this run game matchup, this is an area where there's a lot of things about Notre Dame's offense last year that were very perplexing because the paper numbers didn't always back up what your eyes told you. And when you look at Notre Dame's rush offense last year, it was good. I mean, it was an offense that finished 28th in the country in yards and even better numbers, yards per attempt. Notre Dame finished 13th in college football last year in yards per attempt, which is a very good average, especially when you consider that their starting quarterback provided very little running ability. I mean, I think Sam Hartman had minus 200 yards rushing last year, which makes that an even more impressive number. And so you look at it, tackles for loss allowed, they ranked 13th in fewest tackles for loss allowed. But it didn't always feel like, and I don't know, maybe you guys feel it differently about this, but it didn't always feel like they were very good running the football, especially in some of the bigger games. They rushed for 183 yards against Clemson, which on paper looked good, and they ran really well in the first half. But there was two long runs by the quarterback one was off of just a busted coverage by Clemson. The other one was on a scramble, so it wasn't really a run play. And that padded the numbers a little bit, which is one of the benefits of having a mobile quarterback for this season. It didn't really do that much last year. Notre Dame ran for 176 against Ohio State, which is a pretty good number. And, ran for 170 against NC State, 4.6 per carry, but like 80 that came on one carry. And there just was a lot of time. So after Central Michigan, they ran for 6.4 yards per carry against Central Michigan. But after that, they didn't go over 5 yards a carry until they got to the Clemson game and went for 5.9. So, I mean, that's a stretch of 5 games where you didn't get to 5 yards per carry. Closest they had was the Duke game where they were at 4.97, and a lot of that came in late in the game. So I never felt like the run game was quite as good as the statistics showed because I never felt like this was a Notre Dame run team that could establish itself when it wanted to very often. And then part of it, you could argue, is they didn't always enforce their will in maybe ways they could have or should have. And that's an interesting dynamic. And then you look at the flip side and you look at Texas A&M. And Texas A&M last year, for all their struggles, was a very good rush defense last season. Finished 14th in the country in yards per game. Now, you could say, well, they weren't very good at defending the pass, which factored into that. That's fine. But they also finished 18th in yards per play, which sometimes you got to look at raw numbers of like yards and say, well, there's a lot of things that could go into yards. What if you are a team that has a great starting field position? I've shared this before with you guys who are longtime listeners. I coached in a team one year. We won 10 games and averaged about 40 points a game, but we only averaged about 350 yards per game. Why? Our average starting field position was the 48-yard line because we had a great defense and great special teams. And so even though our numbers wouldn't knock your socks off, we were a very good offense. But if we get the ball at the 40 going in, we can only get 40 yards. I mean, that's the best we can do. We can't ask our defense to spot us at, hey, can you guys let them get down to the 20 first before you force a turnover so that way we can have longer fields and pile up yards? I think those are things that you have to take into consideration. So how do you gauge how good they were? Well, you look at the yards per attempt. And when you look at yards per attempt, then counter that with how many big plays you gave up. So Notre Dame was great in yards per attempt, but not, they were good, but not elite in 20 plus runs so they were at 26. So it means you were a pretty efficient offense when you did run the ball. And that's obviously something that this Notre Dame team is going to have to try to continue and even get better at. But that's also same was true for A&M last year. They were not a team that gave up a lot of big runs last year, but gave up 12 in 13 games. So that's less than one a game. Finished 18th in yards per play. So obviously there was a lot of success there. And then when you look at their numbers, they had a couple games where they got ripped up relatively decently. Really mainly one. LSU ran for 154 yards on them last year, which numbers-wise isn't great, but they did average 5.5 yards per game, and Jaden Daniels had 120 yards rushing. But Tennessee ran on them pretty good last year. Tennessee ran for 232 yards last year and just gashed them all game. But outside of that, I mean, they held 6 of their opponents to minus 100 yards rushing. That includes Miami. That includes Auburn. That includes Alabama. That includes Arkansas, South Carolina, and Abilene Christian. They played Oklahoma State in a bowl game, and that was against Ollie Gordon, who was one of the top rushers in the country last year. They held Oklahoma State to 134 rushing yards, 4.6 yards per attempt. And then their other games, 131 to Ole Miss, but 3.97 per carry, 3.69 per carry against Mississippi State, held them to 133 yards. Auburn had 144 yards, but only 3.5 yards per carry. So this was a team that all season only once, I'm looking at make sure I got that correct. There was only one game last year where Texas A&M gave up over 5 yards a carry. Only one game all year. It's a different story from where they were the year before when they allowed 5 teams to go for over 5 yards a carry. Now, the team that did that against them last year was LSU, who obviously is the offensive coordinator, is now at Notre Dame. So this matchup to me is a very intriguing matchup. It's a matchup that pits a Notre Dame team that is very different looking than what it was a year ago when you come to the run game. They lose a 1,300-yard rusher in Audric Estime. They lose a first-round draft pick at left tackle. They lose a talented, although inconsistent, right tackle in Blake Fisher. And you're starting an offensive line with 6 career starts. That's the concerning part. The positive part is that the reason that Notre Dame has 27 starts on the bench, right, is because they got beat out by what the staff believes to be better players or players that performed better. So there's that balance. And I'm going to have a segment coming out that I did with the guys at CFB Nation, and we talked about the CFB All-America show, and we talked about the offensive line, and there's the rub of, do you go with the veteran players that you at least kind of know who they are in game one, and then make some decisions after that, or do you just, if the younger guys are the better players, you just play them and just take your chances? And that's obviously the direction that Notre Dame went. And heck, I look at it and say that you don't really know what Notre Dame is going to be. There's a lot of understandable angst about the offensive line, especially going against a very good defensive line for Texas A&M that also adds Nick Scourton, although Purdue didn't have a very good run defense last year, despite having Scourton and a couple other guys that were very productive in tackle for loss guys. They finished 45th in the country last year in rush defense. But it's a team that was pretty good stopping the run last season. Mike Elko's defense last year was a little inconsistent stopping the run, if we're being honest. It was a team that at times looked pretty good stopping the run. They certainly did a pretty good job against Notre Dame and shut Notre Dame down for most of that game. But then there was other games where they struggled to stop the run. Clemson ran the ball very well on them in that game, yards-wise. Louisville ran for over 200 yards against them. North Carolina went for almost 200 yards against them. Wake had a decent amount of yards against them last season. So there were some moments where they did struggle to run the football last season, especially against better opponents. Is that a talent thing? Is it a scheme thing? There's just so many different ways to look at it. But at the end of the day, the on-paper matchup, in my opinion, clearly favors Texas A&M. Not only does it favor Texas A&M statistically based off last season, but it favors them in regard to looking and projecting what we know about these teams now going in. And that kind of goes into the aspect of you do have so much unprovenness to the Notre Dame offense when it comes to the run game. Now, what are the reasons to have optimism about Notre Dame in this matchup? Even though I do give advantage Texas A&M in this particular part of the matchup, it's that while Notre Dame loses the big bell cow in Audric Estime from last season, what they do have is a lot more speed. They will be throwing a lot more speed out there, not only in Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, but also when you add the quarterback into the mix. There's a lot more dynamic playmaking ability. How you defend the Notre Dame run game has to change. If you're Texas A&M, you can look at these numbers and then you can focus on what Notre Dame lost, and that's fine. But you also have to now think about, okay, what's different? The run scheme is going to change. You have more dynamic playmakers at running back. You have more dynamic playmaker at quarterback. You have to defend outside anymore. You can't hard crash the edge like you did last year when Notre Dame was so much of a between the tackles and pin and pull team where they were just trying to crash the edge and either blow up the inside runs or force Audric Estime to bounce. And that's not where you wanted Audric Estime to be if you were a Notre Dame coach. You did not want Audric Estime being forced to spill and bounce. You want him playing downhill. And so that's what teams did. If you crash the edge against Notre Dame this year, you leave yourself very vulnerable to the speed up the middle, but you also leave yourself very vulnerable to Riley Leonard and getting hit with, getting hurt by Riley Leonard. So you have to look at Notre Dame differently than you did last year, just like you have to look at A&M somewhat differently. But this is going to be one of, in my opinion, the toughest test the Notre Dame run game is going to face all year. And we're going to learn a lot about this this team early on. And it's not even about can they have 200 yards. Big thing for me is, do they compete? That's really what we're going to see is, do they compete? I don't expect them to consistently run the ball down Texas A&M's throat. I don't expect that at all. What they need to do, however, is find ways schematically and with their blocking to generate big plays. You can get beat on 2 plays in a row, but if you can just do your job on that next second down run and get a body on a body, you've got running backs and a quarterback that can go out there and make big plays in the run game. And that's going to be the key is, can they avoid the drive-killing mistakes in the run game? If you can avoid the drive-killing mistakes and just stay on track to some degree, and even if your first 2 runs and on first and second down only get you 3 yards, 3rd and 4 is a good place to be. It's much better than being there in 3rd and 8 because you got 4 yards on the first play and then -2 on the second play. Stay on schedule, and that's going to where you're going to see Riley Leonard have a big impact, because when you've got a quarterback like Riley Leonard and the speed they have in 3rd down in anything less than 3rd and 5 or less is not a given that's a passing situation. Even in passing situations, you have to be able to defend the run. So that just staying on track is going to be key for Notre Dame in this matchup. And the yards may not be pretty and the yards per attempt may not be pretty, but if they can have some level of efficiency in this game and just avoid the negatives, that's going to give them an opportunity to then hopefully keep sustained drives, which the more you can sustain drives, the more opportunities you have to get your dynamic playmakers going in the run game. And the key is not gash them. The key is generate enough of those big play opportunities in a run game that it really alters what Texas A&M is trying to do. And that's really where we're going to be at. And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing in this football game. But this is a matchup that on paper and then just what we expect to see is a matchup that favors Texas A&M as of right now. Now let's go to the matchup of the Notre Dame pass game against the Texas A&M pass defense. This is an interesting matchup because A&M doesn't have very impressive numbers. Notre Dame actually has pretty impressive numbers. They only finished 49th last year in total passing yards, but they were a top 10 team in pass efficiency, ranking ninth, and they were a top 15 team in yards per attempt, yards per completion, and passing touchdowns. They also ranked 30th in gains of 30 yards or more, and they were decent at avoiding sacks last year at times. The problem is they gave up too many pressures in big moments. You look at Texas A&M on the flip side, they ranked outside the top 50 in passing yards per attempt, per completion, touchdowns allowed, fewest interceptions. They ranked 87th in interceptions, I should say, 76th in pass efficiency defense, and they ranked 76th after giving up 20 pass plays of 30 yards or more last season. The one thing they could do is get after the quarterback, and I fully expect that to be the case. But for all those who think, hey, if they get after the quarterback, pass game's going to stink. Well, look, they got after the quarterback last year. They ranked 8th in college football last year in sacks, and they still ranked outside the top 75 in almost every category that I have mentioned here. And this is going to be the aspect that's going to be key for Notre Dame. Now, the counter argument that you can make against Notre Dame is that a lot of those numbers for Notre Dame that ranked you so high came in moments where you were clearly the superior team from a talent standpoint. Notre Dame last year in the pass game really ripped up their bad opponents. Their first 4 games of the year against Navy, Tennessee State, and NC State and Central Michigan, where NC State was the only good team they played, they were at least 10.1 yards per attempt in each game. They were at 11.9 yards per attempt against Pitt, who was not very good. They were 9.2 against Wake, who wasn't very good. 9.3 against Stanford, who wasn't very good. 12.2 against an Oregon State team whose half their secondary didn't play in that game because they were transferring out. So against the better teams on the schedule, which I think we would all agree, NC State, Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, USC, and Clemson were the 6 best teams in the schedule last year. That's not arguable in my opinion. It's NC State game was good, 11.9 yards per attempt, but 7 against Ohio State, 7.2 against Duke, 6.7 against Louisville, 6.3 against USC, 4.9 against Clemson. So they weren't great against some of the better defenses and the better teams. The question is Texas A&M one of those better teams? And then the next question is this the same Notre Dame team that it was last year? And the answer is no, it's not. That doesn't mean it's going to be better. Doesn't mean it's going to be worse. It means we don't know. And that's what makes this part of the matchup so intriguing and so interesting, is because there is so much turnover in these two units. You've got a brand new coordinator for Texas A&M. You've got a brand new offensive coordinator for Notre Dame. You've got a brand new quarterback for Notre Dame. A lot of new receivers. There's going to be more receivers in the rotation that didn't play much last year or weren't on the team last year than there will be guys that matched up for Notre Dame last season. And then you look at the offensive line, that's very different. And you ask yourself, well, can they hold up enough to allow them to make some of those plays? And then you look at the secondary for Texas A&M, and you've got Tyreek Chappell comes back. You've got Dalton Brooks comes back, who's a regular. Bryce Anderson played a lot last year, but a lot of their secondary are new players. You've got Will Lee transferred from Kansas State, BJ Mays from UAB, Des Ricks came from Alabama. You've got a lot, and that's just part of the new faces that they're going to have in the secondary this year. They've got new line, Torian York comes back, but he's supposed to be flanked by a guy that transferred in from another school from last season. So you're going to have a lot of new faces at Texas A&M too. And so the question is who more quickly adapts to the offense? That's the question. Does the Notre Dame offense with the newcomers and the new system adapt quicker than all the Texas A&M players in their new system? That's going to be the interesting part of this matchup. And there's a lot of things that I believe give Notre Dame an advantage in this. And I do have this being advantage Notre Dame, because when I look at this matchup, I evaluate the Texas A&M players and I look at what they did at their old stops. And I say, Will Lee was a solid player at Kansas State. He was not a world beater at Kansas State. When I look at BJ Mays at UAB, it's a good player there. He was not a world beater there. He was a guy that I think fits this system very well. And they'll both be very good there. Des Ricks was a highly ranked player, but didn't do a whole lot in his first season at Alabama, in his one season at Alabama. So there's a lot of different aspects to this that you've got to kind of ask yourself a little bit, like, okay, how good are they really? How talented are they really? And the answer is we really don't know. But when you look at a guy like BJ Mays, for example, at UAB last year, a good football player, gave up 24 completions last year, allowed 51.1% completion percentage. He allowed 276 yards. He had 1 touchdown allowed, 2 interceptions, 8 breakups, according to Pro Football Focus. That's pretty good numbers. But again, it was one of those situations where, who did they play? How did he perform in some of the bigger moments? He gave up 3 completions on 4 attempts for 31 yards against Georgia. Against North Texas, he gave up 8 catches on 11 attempts for 142 yards. And, so he had some very good moments and some moments that maybe weren't so great. So how good is he going to be in this system? I don't know the answer to that question. His film's good, but he's a guy that, you have to be willing to go after and attack. You look at Will Lee in Kansas State, who, again, very good football player. I like Will Lee. He's 6'3". He's a good football player. But is he a guy that Notre Dame is just in a situation where they can't throw on this guy? We'll find out. I don't know the answer to that. There were some transfer players that Notre Dame's receivers struggled against last year. You look at what they did against Louisville. You look at what they did. I'm trying to remember the other game. There was another. Oh, Duke is another one where Duke had new corners, and the receivers had some moments where they didn't play that well in that game. So they're going to have to step up and they're going to have to perform. Will Lee, again, good player, gave up 23 completions last year on 36 attempts, 63.9% completion rate, gave up 406 yards last year, 4 touchdowns, had 2 picks and 6 pass breakups. He's a good football player. I think he fits this system really well. That's something I do like about him. And he had some good moments against some good teams, and he had some struggles against some teams that were pretty good throwing the football. So what's Notre Dame going to do against them? I don't know the answer to that. We're going to find out. But I like the matchups. And here's the other thing I'll say. I do think this is a defense that is vulnerable to success between the numbers. And when you look at what Mitchell Evans did to this defense last year, for example, they had no answers. No answers for Mitchell Evans last year. Notre Dame didn't have Jaden Greathouse in the matchup against Duke last year. I think that could have had an impact in that game. Absolutely could have an impact in that game because he was really starting to kind of come into his own last season. And now you've got to take advantage of that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to really hurt Duke or hurt Texas A&M throwing the football, you're going to have to win some of those outside matchups. And honestly, I like the matchups of Bo Collins and Jaden Thomas and Chris Mitchell and even Jordan Faison getting some looks against this Texas A&M secondary. So it's going to be an intriguing matchup. And some, Andrew Gilmore just said, I bet A&M will play press man on the wide receivers. I would expect that they try to double Evans. If they try to double Evans, that's great for Notre Dame. It's very because if you're doubling a tight end who's playing, from the hashes inside, that's a lot of guys inside, which is going to leave you some opportunities on the outside. If you try to press a guy like Chris Mitchell, for example, you better hope it works because you do not have 4 guys at cornerback. You've got tall, long guys, and if you don't win that press on the outside against Chris Mitchell, you're toast, especially if you're doubling against Mitchell Evans. So to your point, Andrew, is I don't think that you're incorrect there. I think they will press the Notre Dame receivers. I do think that they will try to say, hey, look, we're not going to let Mitchell Evans beat us. I would absolutely do that if I was Texas A&M. So then the question is, as you said, can the Notre Dame receivers make them pay? That's going to be a big part of this matchup. And if they do get open, can Riley Leonard hit them? If I'm Texas A&M and I know Riley Leonard like I do, the one thing I'm going to say is I'm going to force Riley Leonard to throw the ball downfield. And there's going to be 2 reasons for that. Number 1, I know that that's the part of his game where he can be the most inconsistent. Number 2, I don't think he's going to have enough time to get the ball down the field. That's what I'm banking on. I'm playing aggressively with my outside corners. I'm gonna press them. I'm gonna come up. I'm gonna take away quick game. I'm gonna try to take away some of the screen game. I'm gonna force them to throw the ball down the field. Does Notre Dame have the playmakers on the outside to hurt them? I think they do, but having them on paper is different than executing. But I do think this Notre Dame receiving core with Chris Mitchell, with Jordan Faison, with Jaden Greathouse, with Jaden Harrison, with KK Smith, with Bo Collins, has a lot more playmaking ability than what Notre Dame had on the outside last year. And the other part is Notre Dame had Tobias Merriweather open twice for big plays last year. Hartman missed him the first time. Tobias dropped it the second time. Do they make those plays this year? That's going to be a big part of this conversation. And I'm looking forward to seeing if they're going to be able to do that. But on paper, I certainly believe this is an advantage for Notre Dame based on the numbers from last year and the personnel matchup of who they are this year. I do think Notre Dame has I think Duke actually had a better cornerback situation last year than A&M has this year, in my opinion, especially if they move Tyreek Chappell inside, and we'll talk more about him later. Let's wrap this up with a final look at the Notre Dame offense against the Texas A&M defense. You look at it, and if you compare last year's numbers, Notre Dame was better in points per game. Their offense ranked 7th. A&M's defense ranked 36th. A&M was better in yards. They ranked 19th in yards. Notre Dame ranked 29th. But the Irish ranked 9th in yards per play. Texas A&M ranked 40th in yards per play allowed. Notre Dame's red zone offense ranked 47th. A&M's ranked 69th on defense. Notre Dame's red zone touchdown offense ranked 16th. A&M's ranked 40th. A&M has the advantage on third down. They ranked 18th, but Notre Dame was 24th. Notre Dame ranked 29th last year in most plays of 30 yards or more. A&M ranked 46th. Notre Dame ranked 13th in fewest turnovers lost. A&M only ranked 112th in turnovers forced. So on paper, Notre Dame has the advantage. I believe that Notre Dame has the advantage from a skill standpoint. A&M is adding a defensive staff that will be led by their head coach. And it's a defense that was good last year, but not dynamic, not an elite defense. Last year, Duke gave up 19 points per game, which, again, was a good number. They were a good team last year on defense. That ranked them last season 16th in scoring defense. So, obviously, that was improvement over what Texas A&M was last season. The Duke defense also ranked last season 42nd in yards allowed per game. Obviously, Texas A&M was better. There's reasons for that. And then Duke last year ranked 28th in yards per play. So the two most important numbers of those three, I believe that points per game and yards per play are more important than total yards. Duke's adding a system that was more effective last season. There's no doubt about it. Notre Dame is also adding an offensive coordinator that was more effective. So Notre Dame's offense ranked 7th and 9th last year in points and yards per play. They're adding the offensive coordinator who led the nation in both of those categories last season and also led the nation, I believe, in total offense last year. He was, number 1 in total offense by 12 yards. And they were also number 1 in yards per play. And, of course, they ranked number 1 last year in scoring. So both teams have added coaching, have added a system or a coach at the top that led better units of what they have on paper. Then you have to look at, okay, what about the new additions? Obviously, A&M's new additions up front were very good. Their perimeter additions are upgrades for them, but I don't know that they're more upgrades than what Notre Dame will have in regard to their upgrades. So it's going to be a very interesting matchup, but I believe that it's really hard for me to argue that Notre Dame doesn't hold the advantage here. They hold the advantage statistically. The new coaches that they added for Notre Dame were more effective than the coaches were for Texas A&M. Obviously, A&M didn't. The current players, they held their own against LSU last year, but they certainly and they did a pretty good job 2 years ago when they beat LSU 2 years ago, or with Denbrock there. Last year, LSU won 42-30. They gave up only 389 yards, but they gave up 7.5 yards per play. They just didn't have the ball a ton in that game because the LSU defense was a hot mess and couldn't get off the field in that game. But obviously, he's a coach that went against Jay Bateman last year. Mike Denbrock did and had a lot of success against Jay Bateman's offense at Florida. Last season, they scored 52 points, had 701 yards of offense and 11.5 yards per play. So I don't know that Jay Bateman's going to add a whole lot of value to, hey, how do we stop this Mike Denbrock offense? Because they were not able to do it the last couple of years. So the year before, LSU scored 45 points on Florida, had 528 yards of offense to 7.5 yards per play. So I just think it's advantage Notre Dame. The one, and we've talked about this a lot, the one potential caveat is the offensive line versus the defensive line. That could be the great neutralizer. If Notre Dame can just hold their own there, then I think that they're going to be okay, but we'll dive more into that tomorrow. So that's it for the offensive breakdown. And next, I'm going to dive into a breakdown of the Notre Dame defense. Part two, let's look at the matchup of the Notre Dame defense against the Notre Dame offense, or the Texas A&M offense. And this is where, like, if you go back and look at the offensive numbers against Notre Dame's offense, A&M's defense, they're somewhat competitive. There's the assumption that the offensive line for Notre Dame will struggle enough to where it makes it a battle that A&M potentially could win. But Notre Dame has the advantage in the pass game. A&M has the advantage in the run game, but they were both good last year. Overall scoring, Notre Dame has clear as the advantage. When you flip the argument to the other side, it's not close. It's far bigger gap between the A&M offense last year and the Notre Dame defense last year. Notre Dame will have the same defense it did last year schematically. Obviously, lots of new players. A&M is going to look a whole lot different, and that's going to make this a very intriguing a breakdown to dive into, because when you look at Texas A&M running the football last year, it's an offense that struggled to run the football. They ranked 92nd in the country in yards per game, 95th in yards per play, 100th in yard 20-plus runs. They only had 11, and they ranked 42nd in tackles for loss allowed. Notre Dame's run defense last year ranked 28th overall, 24th in yards per attempt, 48th in 20-plus yard runs allowed. They were 53rd in tackles for loss. This isn't a team that generated a ton of tackles for loss last season, but the overall numbers clearly give the advantage to Notre Dame. That's when you have to then factor in, okay, well, this is a different offense than it was last year. The offensive system last year was geared towards what? It was geared towards throwing the football. It was Bobby Petrino, Jim Bill Fisher. They wanted to throw the football. Well, enter Colin Klein, who is a guy that believes in a little bit different. He wants to be balanced. Colin Klein at Kansas State last year led an offense that ranked 12th in the country last season in total rushing yards at 204.1 yards per game. Now, the impressive part about that is not only did they rank 14th in rushing yards last year, they did, or 12th in rushing yards last year. They did that the year after they lost Deuce Vaughn. They actually ranked, they didn't run for as many yards as they did in 2022. They actually ran for 208.3 yards in 2022. But they ranked higher because, remember, last year you had some clock rules that made things different. So they were 15th in rushing in 2022 with Deuce Vaughn. They jumped up to 12th in rushing last year without Deuce Vaughn, where DJ Giddens was your top running back. So he's a guy that likes to run the football. That's great. Sure, you like to run the football, but do you know how to run the football? And Colin Klein certainly knows how to run the football and has done a great job developing good rushing teams at Kansas State during his tenure there. They ranked 63rd in his first year as offensive coordinator. So we saw a very big jump in his last two seasons rushing the football from Colin Klein. And of course, let's not forget, this is a guy that as a quarterback in college ran for 1,000 yards one season and 27 touchdowns. I think we brought that up the other day. I think it was 2011. Yeah, he ran for 1,141 yards and 27 touchdowns in 2011. And then in 2012, he ran for 925 yards and 23 touchdowns. So the guy rushed for 50 touchdowns by himself his last 2 years. So guess what? He's going to try to run the football. It's going to be way different than it was for A&M in the past couple years. They're going to run the inside zones and the duos, but they're going to run a lot of gap scheme, a lot of pin and pull stuff. They're not going to rely on just having bullies up front. They're going to try to create creases in the run game. They're going to try to use their tight end alignments and motions and shifts to create some spacing that is going to give them some, ideally, in theory, give them some advantages in the run game. The thought being the more gaps that we can create, the more gaps you have to be accountable for, the more surfaces we have to try to create run lanes. And so you're going to see that. They went out and added, I think Trevor talked about this yesterday, they added, I think, 3 new tight ends to their roster. There's a reason for that, because Colin Klein likes to use the tight ends. And so you're going to see a much different running team than last year. Now, you can look at the stats and say, yeah, they got a ways to go. And there's no doubt they've got a ways to go. But you kind of have to look at those stats and say, okay, they may tell us something about the offensive line, and that's an issue for Texas A&M. There's no doubt. They've got good enough. I mean, Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels are certainly good enough to put up very good numbers this year if the line plays well. And as Al Golden said yesterday, and we said the same thing yesterday, they expect that Connor Wegman's going to run more this year because that's kind of what Colin Klein does. So I do expect A&M to be a better running team this year than they were last year. The question is going to be how much better and when do they get better? Are they going to be better immediately against Notre Dame, or is it going to take them some games to kind of get rolling? Do they maybe struggle a little bit against Notre Dame early, but then go out and get better and better as the season goes on? And you know, I often talk about, you know, when people, you know, say, oh, you lose early, you're done. I often talk about that Ohio State 2014 season as sort of my example for why I just think that is just an incredible reaction. Because when you think about that Ohio State team and you think about, you know, what changed for them that year, well, they couldn't really run the ball early in the year. As their run game finally took off, that became a much more dangerous team. And that allowed them to go out there and have a lot of success that season. And I think it was year 3 in Tom Herman. But again, that was year 3. This is year 1 of Colin Klein and game 1 of Colin Klein. So how quickly can he really get that going? That's going to be the question. And that's going to determine a lot about this matchup because, look, I'll get into the pass game next, but just big picture, I don't know that Texas A&M can score enough points to win if they can't at least somehow establish the run game. They have to, and they don't have to run for 200 yards against Notre Dame. I don't think that's going to happen, but they have to at least make Notre Dame work in the run game to then maybe you have to insert your safety a little bit more to stop the run. You have to use your safeties to come down and account for the quarterback runs, the cutbacks, or the pin and pulls. And hey, we're going to use our motions and get you kind of an overloaded surface and just kind of down block, kick out our linemen and say, hey, if you're going to stop this run, your safeties and corners are going to have to stop it. All right, cool. So Notre Dame flies their safeties and corners come down. Next thing you know, they're running some sort of, you know, whether it be a halfback pass or most likely sort of an option pass or some kind of bootleg or something along those lines, an RPO where you bang down on your backside safety and you're just hitting that glance route behind it for a big play. There's a lot of things that A&M is going to do differently this year that present different options. And if they can't get the run game going at all, if Notre Dame is able to shut that down, then they're going to have a very tough time scoring enough points to win outside of turnovers and special teams giving them easy scores. That's really going to be the key. They're going to have to figure out a way to get the run game going. For Notre Dame, you want to keep A&M off schedule. It's the opposite of what I talked about on the other side of the ball. You want to get them into passing downs. You want to force Connor Wegman to beat you from the pocket. Not that he's not a talented player, can't do it, but again, that's where you think you have an advantage, just like A&M wants to slow down the Notre Dame run game and get them in third and longs. Same thing is true on this side. Connor Wegman's a very good football player, not overly experienced. He's a very talented football player, but like a lot of young quarterbacks, he's not a guy you want sitting in the pocket on 3rd and 7 or 2nd and 12 or 2nd and 11 or 2nd and 9 all day throwing the football. Because he doesn't have the receiving core to go out there and really hurt you in some of those big moments like, let's say, Ohio State did last year with Kyle McCord, because he had a Emeka Egbuka and he had Marvin Harrison Jr. and he had Julian Fleming. So even though you pretty much shut the pass game down for most of the game, they were able to make enough of those not big plays like long plays, but clutch plays, moving the chains on 4th and 7, converting to 3rd and 19 to be able to win the game. And that's going to be the question is, can they get to the 17 that Ohio State was able to get to last year to beat Notre Dame? That's going to be the key if the Notre Dame offense doesn't get better. And so that's going to be a big part of this game. Notre Dame stopping the run game and making this a pocket game for Connor Wegman, because if he does that, they're going to struggle, because that's not where Colin Klein's offense thrives, and it's not where you want to put this team in that situation. But it's going to come down to this: these numbers have to play themselves out on Saturday. It's going to be a big key to this game. Get to the next part of the matchup, and that's the pass game matchup. This is a very intriguing aspect of this game because, again, I just broke down the numbers for Colin Klein, right? And the run game improvement is going to be a lot better. There's going to be a lot of run game improvement from Colin Klein. How much, how early, all those things are going to factor into this particular matchup, but he's going to eventually get it going. The flip side is true on the other, right? In the other side, because last year, Texas A&M did throw for a lot of yards. They were 30th in the country in passing yards, 23rd in yards per attempt, 36th in yards per completion. Those are all respectable numbers. 21st in the country in 30-plus yard passes, 35th in efficiency. And when you consider that they played all but 4 games with their backup quarterbacks, that factors into it. They would have been even higher had Connor Wegman not gone down last season, right? Like, that's just the reality of it. If you're still a top 30 pass offense and you spent 2/3 of the year without your starting quarterback, those are good numbers. Now, the question is going to be, can they continue those numbers? Because when you look at the other side, and I talked about how good Colin Klein's offense was last year at running the football, they were not a great passing team last year. They finished 54th in the country in passing yards per game, and they finished 60th in the country in yards per pass attempt last season. And Kansas State last season also finished 51st in passer rating, 30 touchdowns, 10 picks. They were a team that, in my view, 72nd in completion percentage. And that was with a quarterback that I keep being told by national media people is a top 5 Heisman finalist or candidate for this season, which I say sarcastically. I just don't buy that at all. But they're not. He doesn't have the intricate NFL pro style sort of scheme that Bobby Petrino had and that Jimbo Fisher had. What he's going to do, however, is he's going to build the pass game around the run game. And that's why I say it's so important to stop the run. Because if they can't run the football, I don't know that Colin Klein's the kind of coach that's going to be able to generate enough scheme-wise in the pass game to beat you. Now, where I do think Texas A&M presents some matchups is they're not a team that's going to provide a ton of speed. We'll get into that here in a second. But they have really good size. Ja'Day Walker, 6'4", Noah Thomas is 6'6". They're guys that if you have to commit too many resources to the run game to stop it, can win some one-on-ones just by simply outplaying you for the football. They are going to use their tight ends a lot more than they have in the past, in my opinion. A&M's or Kansas State's leading receiver last year was a tight end. You know, will they be able to get that kind of production this season? We'll find out. But you compare that, top 30 pass game last year, new coordinator was more of a top 50 kind of guy, and you're matching that up against what is one of the best pass defenses in the country. And one of the interesting things about this matchup that just kind of shows me that the national media really didn't pay attention to Notre Dame last year. Like, they'll in one breath mention Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts, and then next breath talk about how how's Notre Dame going to handle the Connor Wegman and the athleticism of the A&M offense. And I kind of chuckle a little bit about that because, I mean, this is a Notre Dame team that in the last 2 years has faced C.J. Stroud, has faced Caleb Williams twice, has faced Drake May, has faced Tanner McKee, Jaron Hall. I mean, we can go down the list of quarterbacks that this team has faced last couple of years, and guess what? The pass defense has been lights out. Spencer Rattler, pass defense has been outstanding in almost all of those instances. You're talking about a Notre Dame team last year that finished in the top 5 in fewest passing yards per game, fewest passing yards per attempt. They tied Michigan for the fewest touchdown passes allowed. They ranked number 1 in college football last year in pass efficiency defense. And I don't have this stat on here, and I should add it this year, but Notre Dame, I believe, finished 2nd last season in lowest completion percentage allowed. Yes, they were 2nd behind only Florida State last season at 52.4. So that's another category. Their worst category that I have marked here in passing last year was yards allowed per completion, and they ranked 12th. They ranked 7th in most passing plays allowed by 30 yards or more. And if you look at least off the top of my head, 3 of those 30-plus yard pass plays came in late in games when Notre Dame was winning by a bunch. And so that's an aspect of it that you factor in as well. Is A&M going to really be able to protect or throw the football effectively enough against this pass defense that returns 2 All-Americans and their two transfers are a 6-year and a 5th-year senior. And your only young guy in the starting lineup is Christian Gray, who might be your most physically gifted player that you have at the position. So this is an area where Notre Dame has a big advantage, in my opinion. They have a personnel advantage. They have a schematic advantage. The question is going to be, does the run game of Texas A&M improve enough and play well enough to force this into a throwing game? If it is forced into a throwing game, it's a definitely advantage Notre Dame. If it becomes about balance and A&M's allowed to throw a lot of second and short, third and short to medium situations where they still have the threat of the run and they can use their RPO game and their play action game and their misdirection game with the pass and all their motions and shifts to try to generate guys free, that's when you can get in trouble. That's really where you can say, hey, look, can this Notre Dame team go out and stop the run? If they stop the run, then I think that leads right into a dominant matchup here. And so that's what's going to make this very, very intriguing, this matchup. Looking overall, last year, Notre Dame ranked 7th in scoring defense. A&M ranked 25th in scoring offense. Notre Dame ranked 5th in fewest yards allowed. They ranked 5th in fewest yards per play. A&M ranked 50th in total offense, 49th in yards per play. They ranked 2nd in red zone defense. They ranked 3rd in red zone touchdown defense. A&M ranked 48th and 82nd. Notre Dame ranked 30th in third down defense. A&M was 32nd in third down offense. That's the only one that's really close in this matchup. Notre Dame ranked 15th in 30-plus yards, the yard plays allowed. A&M ranked 35th in 30-plus yard plays gained. Notre Dame ranked 13th in turnovers gained. And A&M ranked 112th last year in turnovers lost. Actually, the 13 number is not accurate. Let me go see what their turnover numbers were last year. I believe that is incorrect. Let me just pull this up real quick and make sure that I am okay. So they ranked last year. They ranked 33rd in turnovers lost, their offense. So the 112 is incorrect. They lost. I don't know actually what I have there. They had 13 gained, which ranked 110th last season. They were 33rd in turnovers lost. So that's a better number than that number shows. But Notre Dame ranked 13th in turnovers gained. So when you look at this matchup and you look at this game, the thing you have to ask yourself is Notre Dame in a situation where they can control the matchups the way that they're supposed to, where they have the advantages? And can they get into situations where, let me just I'm just gonna put that person in timeout. I don't have the patience today for just stupidity. I really don't. So I'll have to have Vince edit this part out. I just don't have time for just stupid people. I really don't. If you look at the on paper matchup and you look at how this game is going to play out, there's the concern, the angst that Notre Dame fans have, which is justified. Can the offensive line hold up against what is going to be, in my opinion, it is one of the best defensive lines of college football, and what I think is going to be one of the best young middle linebackers in college football, and Torian York, who I'm a very, very big fan of, by the way. Can they hold up in that matchup? That could be a scenario where the reason there is understandable angst, because that matchup is such that depending on how much A&M dominates it, it could impact every other part of the game. If you get dominated up front, then you're going to struggle to run the ball. If you struggle to run the ball, it's going to be harder to throw the football. If you can't move the football and score points, that puts way more pressure on your defense. It keeps the game close. It means Colin Klein doesn't have to get into his, too deep in his bag of tricks. He can play the field position battle, and then he can do some things schematically with the run game, with motions, with shifts, with leverages, different things like that to hopefully create enough big plays to win a 17-14 game like they did last year, like Ohio State did last year. And that's going to really be the big key to this game, is that matchup right there. What's not being discussed enough, in my opinion, is while that is a legitimate concern, an absolutely legitimate concern. If A&M wins this game, it's going to be about their defensive line, front seven, dominating Notre Dame and turnovers. That's what it's going to come down to. But what's not being discussed enough is Notre Dame has the same ability to do to the Texas A&M offense what they expect the A&M defense to do to the Notre Dame offense. There's this expectation that Texas A&M is going to dominate the Notre Dame offense. Okay, I understand where that's coming from. And when you look at the numbers and you look at what Texas A&M was last year, again, 36th in the country in scoring defense, that's not bad when you consider some of the issues they had on offense. When you look at their pass defense last year, not great. Their run defense was excellent last year. They add Nick Scourton to the mix. They add Solomon DeShields to the mix. They add Scooby Williams to the mix. They add, I think they had 3 other D-line transfers who were good football players that are being added to the mix. But that's going against a Notre Dame offense that was pretty good statistically last year, was pretty good outside of playing some elite defenses and just one game where they just flat out laid an egg against Louisville. But then you look at it and you say, but does A&M, is their defense such that they're just going to completely shut down Notre Dame the way that Ohio State's defense did? Is that what we're thinking that this offense or this defense is? Is this A&M defense going to be like Ohio State? That's going to be the question. Maybe it will be. And you're adding a great defensive mind in Mike Elko to the equation. But Notre Dame is also adding a pretty successful offensive mind. And that's where I kind of get frustrated with this conversation is, somebody say, do you think A&M can beat Notre Dame? Of course Texas A&M can beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame lost to a 4-loss Clemson team on the road last year, folks. If Clemson's with 8 starters missing can beat Notre Dame, if Louisville can beat Notre Dame on the road, then of course A&M can beat Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it. The frustration that I have is that there's this obsession on focusing on one part of this game. I just laid out the numbers to y'all. Which side of the ball has the bigger advantage? The A&M defense over the Notre Dame offense, even though they have no statistical advantage over Notre Dame, or the Notre Dame defense against the Texas A&M offense? Again, yards per game and yards per play. Rushing, Notre Dame's defense 28th and 24th, A&M's offense 91st and 95th. Passing, Notre Dame's defense in yards per game and yards per attempt, 3rd and 3rd. You return 2 All-Americans from that group. A&M's offense, 30th and 23rd. But their new coach that's being brought in ranks in the 50s in both of those categories. Right? So, and then you look at total defense. Notre Dame last year in points per game on defense, 7th, yards per game, 5th, yards per play, 5th. A&M ranked 25th, 50th, and 49th. So I'm to believe that a team in Notre Dame who averaged more points per game offensively last year than A&M, more yards per play than A&M last year, gave up fewer yards points per game than A&M last year, gave up fewer yards per game last year, gave up fewer yards per play, dominates A&M in every category, is a team that can't handle what A&M is going to bring to them. That's my frustration with this conversation. Can A&M win? Heck yeah, they can win. And you guys know my feelings on Mike Elko. I've been saying him here since this show started. Love Mike Elko. Great football coach. But Notre Dame should be expected to win this game. There's no question that they should be expected to win this game. And if they can't, that's a problem for me. But the expectation should be that Notre Dame is going to go in there and win. And I don't know, other than just paranoia and just choosing to be negative, I don't see why someone would look at this game and say that A&M is the team that has less to prove than Notre Dame. That's the frustration I have. It's like somebody said, well, Notre Dame tends to lose these games. I mean, okay. Last 2 years, Notre Dame has gone 7-4 against ranked teams. Okay. You know what Texas A&M's record against ranked teams is the last 2 years? 3-7. 2 of those wins were over a ranked Miami team 2 years ago who finished 5-7, and over a ranked Arkansas team who finished that year 7-6. That's 2 of their 3 ranked wins. And yet Notre Dame, who's got 7 wins over ranked opponents the last 2 years, including multiple on the road, And then Notre Dame also beat an NC State team who finished who was ranked most of the year. They weren't ranked when they played. And, you know, it gets frustrating. It gets taxing, to be honest with you, when the same people come on the chat, come on the board with nonstop negativity, but can't make a sound argument other than I feel. That's it. I feel like Notre Dame, can't throw in this situation. Okay, well, you have no evidence to back up that can't happen with any consistent. I feel like Notre Dame doesn't ever win these kind of games. Okay, well, tell me when A&M does. I feel like this. I feel like that. When everything about this matchup should say that Notre Dame has the advantage. Does that mean Notre Dame's going to win? Of course it doesn't mean Notre Dame's definitely going to win. That's why you play the games. But to sit there and say that this is a game that Notre Dame has more to prove than Texas A&M, that we should assume that Texas A&M is in a better situation than Notre Dame. There's no argument other than your feelings that makes you feel that way. That's my frustration. There's no okay, well, yeah, but the A&M D line against Notre Dame. Okay, last I checked, this isn't a jersey scrimmage where it's just the Notre Dame offense against just the Notre Dame defense. Notre Dame had one of the 10 best defenses of college football last year, right? Where was the Texas A&M defense last year? It's very good. It wasn't as good as Notre Dame's. Notre Dame's offense was, for all the whining about Notre Dame's offense from last year, they ranked in the top 10 in scoring. What did A&M's offense do last year? They ranked 25th. Notre Dame's defense last season ranked in the 7th in scoring defense. A&M's defense last year ranked 36th in scoring. So again, I ask you, other than your feelings, what's the argument that should make you as a Notre Dame fan or an analyst say that, gee, I just don't think Notre Dame can win this game? That's my problem. Now, can A&M win? Again, of course. This isn't going to be an easy win. And I'll have some responses to some of the stuff in the buy, sell, hold about that. But Notre Dame has the advantage on paper. Notre Dame has had, in the last 5 years, it's the other one, A&M's got more talent. Okay, based on what? Recruiting rankings. Half the players from that team that were ranked number 1 are gone. The last 5 drafts, Notre Dame has had 27 players drafted. I think it's 10 in the first 2 rounds. A&M's had 17 guys drafted, 2 in the first 2 rounds. So again, other than the fact that they have an SEC logo on their jersey, what's the reason for Notre Dame expecting? And honestly, I kind of feel bad for Texas A&M fans because if they win this game, it's a huge win. I mean, it is a huge win. But the way that Notre Dame's being talked about, I wonder if it's going to tamp down some of the excitement over the win. And if they lose, there's this expectation that they got upset by an inferior opponent when in reality they wouldn't have. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I feel like the narrative about this game is as frustrating as any game I've covered in a long time. It really is. And a friend of mine kind of brought this up. He said it reminds him a lot of the 2018 Notre Dame-Michigan game, where a lot of people felt Notre Dame didn't have a chance. They got to replace Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey and had 3 new stars in on there. And then you lost Equinemi St. Brown and you lost some good players off your defense and just like, man, this Michigan team's going to be a playoff team and yada, yada, yada. And Notre Dame dominated that game. The game was never as close as the final score. Notre Dame dominated that game. So that's kind of where I'm at, right? It's just, if you're a Notre Dame fan thinking that this is a game that Notre Dame is not the better team, then I don't know what to tell you. Either you don't have no clue how what Notre Dame has done, or you have never watched A&M in the last 5 years. I mean, that's kind of like Duke game last year. Notre Dame played terrible against Duke last year, still won. I mean, think about that. Still won. Played terrible last year. So I think A&M has a lot more to prove to Notre Dame. However, from a practical standpoint of like actual football, from a perception standpoint, I will agree that this is a much bigger game for Notre Dame than it is Texas A&M. There's no doubt from a perception standpoint. And hopefully they can go out and get a win. So that's going to do it for the stats breakdown. I'm going to get into just a brief talk about game records next, and going to have some fun with that. and then we'll get into our buy, sell, hold. So, but before we do, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. Would greatly appreciate that. And as always, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Next couple segments are going to be a little shorter. I'm just going to focus on a game wrecker conversation, right? Who are the game wreckers in this game to keep an eye on? And then each week I'll try to mix it up a little bit and talk about who those are. But here's where I'm at with my game wreckers conversation. I'm going to start with the Notre Dame offense versus the Texas A&M defense and talk about both sides. And then I'll go into the Notre Dame defense against the Texas A&M offense. And the first one, it starts with, like, this is an easy one. When you look at the Notre Dame offense, it's Riley Leonard. I mean, there's a reason you brought Riley Leonard in as your quarterback, and it's not just to manage the offense. It's to be a playmaker. If you brought Riley Leonard in to manage your offense, then I don't know what you're looking for, and so I factor in. Let me say something real quick. An A&M guy says, "Are we saying Indy is better because of the stats alone, or are we also accounting for strength of schedule?" It's stats. It's watching film. I don't care about strength of schedule, to be honest with you. And if you want to talk about strength of schedule, A&M played one ACC team last year and got dominated. So it comes into a lot of it. Like, you've been great in the chat so far, and I really appreciate that you're coming here to engage. But it's really about stats and film. This breakdown, we do a show every day. This breakdown that I just did is a statistical breakdown. It is looking at the stats. There are other parts that we do. Tomorrow we'll do more about keys and execution, things like that. Yesterday we talked into some bigger picture things. This was a statistical breakdown. It's part of the conversation. And when you talk about, like, somebody was in the chat talking about, Notre Dame does this against lower inferior teams, and you're telling me you don't have a clue about Notre Dame when you say things. Not you, Aggie kid. I'm talking about the person that I banned from the chat. So it's not just about stats, but that segment of the show was a statistical breakdown of the two teams. It's not all we do. There's a lot more that goes into it. And this segment is going to be more about the practical aspects of this matchup, which it comes down to the players. Who makes the plays? And for Notre Dame, you bring in Riley Leonard to be a playmaker. You did not have a quarterback last year that could be a playmaker. And here's why that matters. These are the exact games that you bring Riley Leonard in for, and that's why he's my number one game wrecker for Notre Dame. He has to be a game wrecker. Here's what I mean by that. You are playing an A&M team with a great defensive line. You are playing an A&M team that's got a great head coach and a great defensive mind as head coach. You are playing an A&M team that has length and athleticism and presents some problems for your offense. You are not going to go out in this game and dominate Texas A&M in the trenches. I just do not see that happening. That would be the biggest shock of all shockers. You got to hopefully hold your own. But the reality is that's an area where you do not have the matchup advantage. Last year, when Notre Dame's O-line got beat, that was a problem for Notre Dame. And it's always a problem. But you bring a guy like Riley Leonard in to say, hey, listen, we need you, looking at it from the coaching standpoint, this is what you're asking him. We need you, sometimes when things break down, to put your Superman cape on, right? And you got to do this, right? You got to pull off the Clark Kent, clothes, and you got to be Superman and go make plays. That's just the reality of it. These are the games where you need him to do some of that. You need him to provide some of that impact for your team. And when you go on the road and you are playing a top 25 team, and I actually have argued it a lot in the past years that A&M winning each season is overrated. I'm perfectly fine with Texas A&M being the 20th ranked team in the country. There's no doubt. As I said, they do have talent. They do have a talented quarterback. They do have decent skill on the perimeter. They are very good on the defensive line in the front seven. They did bring in what I felt was the third best offensive coordinator hire of the entire offseason. I'm totally fine with them being there. They're a legit top 25 team. So if you are going to go on the road and beat a team that's very good defensively, and especially in the front seven, on the road, your quarterback needs to be a big-time playmaker. And for Riley Leonard, that starts with his with his ability on with his legs, and it also starts with his ability to make plays with his arm. He's got to do both. He has to do both. If he can't do both, he's going to struggle. This offense is going to struggle to consistently move the ball. They're going to have to be better in these situations. He's going to have to be better in these situations than what they had last year from a playmaking standpoint. And so that's why he's my number one game wrecker. Real quick response about A&M being exceptional at home. A&M's home wins last year were over New Mexico, Louisiana Monroe, Auburn, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Abilene Christian. None of those teams were any good. The only team that they played last year that was good was Alabama. And yes, it was a competitive game, but they still lost that game. And Texas A&M in 2022 at home beat Sam Houston State, beat Miami by 8, lost to Ole Miss, lost to Florida, beat UMass, and lost to App State. So how difficult you are at home depends on how good your team is, right? So, and yes, I do think it's going to be a tougher place to play this time than it was last year because you've got a better coach. That's the key. You've got a better coach there. And that's why Notre Dame's playmakers have to step up. And Riley Leonard's where it starts, but he can't be alone. They're going to need their backs to make plays. Here's another reality of a game like this. I'm watching the Florida State Georgia Tech game. Do you guys remember the play? I believe they were running left to right on the screen. They ran an outside zone to the left, and Jamal Haynes cuts it back. And when they showed the tight copy, and it's funny because I got the all 22, and I went and I was like, is it as bad on the all 22 as it was on TV? It was. There was almost nobody from Florida State. Like the hole was literally. This is the TV screen. Like there was like barely any like Florida State guys on the outside. I mean, it was a giant hole. I hope that Notre Dame can do that against A&M. It's probably not going to happen. Your holes are going to be about this big when they're there, and they're going to close up in a hurry. That means your running backs need to see it and hit it with good timing and hit it fast. You're going to have this is one of those games you're not going to be most likely 60 to 70% with efficient runs. It's going to be 2s and 1s and 3s and some -1s. But when the 50 comes, you got to hit the 50. That's going to be the key. So you're going to need Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price to make some plays in this game. And here's the other thing, too. You've got to be – there's a statement that Mike Elko made when he was the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And the defensive line for Notre Dame was struggling in fall camp, and they struggled in the spring. And there was a lot of angst from Notre Dame fans, shocker, about the offensive line or the defensive line. Hey, man, you're going to struggle. And he was like, no, we're going to be fine. He said that offensive line, they're human lie detectors is what he called them. And when you're wrong, they're going to make you pay for it. Well, in this instance, it's one of those things where that's kind of how this A&M D-line is. If you make a mistake, they're going to make you pay for it. What Notre Dame has to do on the flip side is they're not going to make a lot of mistakes on defense, in theory, but they're going to make some because everybody does. If there's a wrong fit by a linebacker, if there's a wrong fit by a safety, if a lineman is supposed to secure the C gap and he slants inside and you seal him, when those things happen, you've got to see it and you've got to hit it. And I think the other part of this too is the running backs out of the backfield could be big. And you know, whether that's wheel routes, angle routes, seam routes, screens, however the case may be, your two most dynamic weapons, in my opinion, on offense are your two backs, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. You have to be able to hit that, have those guys hit those plays. You've got to be able to hit those big plays with those two guys. And then the other one for me, when I look at the game wreckers on offense, it's going to come down to the two transfer receivers. I think Mitchell Evans is going to play well. I think Jaden Greathouse is going to have his success. But you're going to have to make some plays on the outside. You've got to make plays on the outside, and you've got to make plays on the outside vertically. The best thing that Notre Dame can do is to line up and say, yes, you're going to be good here, but you have to defend us to the width of the field. Look, Mitchell Evans was great last year. Slot players at times were pretty good last year. But the inability to beat teams on the outside allowed teams to change how they defended Notre Dame. They were able to reduce everything and knowing that they couldn't hurt them outside. Notre Dame is going to have to make an early statement in this game in this season by saying you have to hit some plays outside. Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins are those two guys that have to hit those plays. They're going to need those two fellows to step up and say, hey, listen, time is here. We've got it. The one-on-one is there. I've got to win off the line. I've got to win at the catch point and hit a couple of those big plays. I think that's going to be a big part of this game, and that can be game wreckers. That can be a thing where you're backed up. It's 3rd and 9. You're at your own 25, and you hit that one-on-one down the field, and boom, it sparks you. Did any of you guys watch the SMU-Nevada game on Saturday night? SMU could do nothing. I mean, they were just getting dominated, and then they hit 2 big plays. I think they were both to their tight end. 2 big plays completely changed that game around. They hit 2 shots down the field. And when they hit those 2 shots, it completely flipped the field. They couldn't move the ball. They couldn't get anything going. Nevada was kicking their butts, but they hit those big shots. It flips the field. They get a much needed score. They got some momentum. And now all of a sudden you're rolling. Notre Dame's going to need plays like that if they're going to win this game and play the way offensively they need to play. And it really is going to come down to Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins are going to be the keys to there. Now, there's an opposite argument to this. The other part of this is A&M's got some game wreckers as well. And what Notre Dame has to do is make sure that the A&M game wreckers don't dominate this game. They're game record talents, but you got to make sure that they don't actually do that they don't actually make that type of impact in this game. And there's 3 guys that I really look at as potentially being that type of player. And the first 2 are up front. And Nick Scourton and Shamar Turner are 2 of the best linemen that Notre Dame's going to play all year. They're both good athletes for their size. Shamar Turner's a very athletic player. He's probably going to play on the edge at times, but my expectation he's going to play more inside in this game over your guards. Nick Scourton's an edge player. They both had double-digit tackles for loss last year. The combined, I think they had 16.5 sacks between the 2 of them last year. They're guys who can take over a game. And if you get completely dominated up front, that can negate a lot of what's going on the perimeter. If we're to assume that Notre Dame has a skill player advantage, and for the sake of this conversation, let's have that. Let's assume that. Let's assume that Notre Dame has the advantage at tight end against their backers and safeties, and let's assume that Notre Dame has an advantage on the outside with Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins and Jordan Faison and Jaden Cariaso. Let's just assume that. That type of matchup can get completely negated if you get dominated in the trenches. And the game that's always going to pop in my head, and I'm old, and so I'm going to go old school, but I remember watching the 1995, I think it was the Orange Fiesta Bowl between Florida and Georgia. It's at the end of the 1995 season. It was between Florida and Nebraska. And that Florida team, I mean, they had Danny Warfel quarterback. You had Chris Doring at wide receiver, but you had a lot of other talented players. I believe Ike Hilliard was on that team. I believe that Rido Anthony was on that team. I'm actually pulling up their stats now. You had Chris Doring was a 1,000-yard receiver. Ike Hilliard was on that team. Rido Anthony was on that team. Jaquez Green was on that team. I mean, they had such great skill players, but they got annihilated by Nebraska. Why? Because Danny Warfel, I think they had like an early score. After that, could do nothing because he spent the whole game on his back. And it completely negated your perimeter advantage in that game. Completely negated it. Notre Dame has to make sure that they don't do that, and the 2 guys that can do that to them are these 2 players. And, JG Whitetown ND fans says, are they really that good? Who did they play against that was really good? Well, number one, I mean, Shamar Turner played in the SEC last year. I mean, he's not a guy that transferred in from Texas A&I. He's not a guy that transferred in from Sam Houston State. He's a guy that was there. he is that kind of player. And they had a lot of other guys that made a lot of production last year. So I'm gonna push back on that one. Number one, he's a guy that last year, again, 10.5 sacks in a season, didn't play in the bowl game. That's pretty good production for a kid in the SEC. There's no doubt about that. And then Miami game that they lost, he did have a sack in that game. He had a sack against Auburn, 2.5 sacks against Arkansas. He had a sack at Tennessee, 1.5 sacks against South Carolina, a sack against Mississippi State. So he didn't exactly have production in bum moments against bad teams. He's a guy that has legitimate talent. Nick Scourton's a guy that if you go back and watch his film against teams like Ohio State and Michigan last year at Purdue, he more than held his own in those moments as well. So this isn't a guy, Nick Scourton, who padded his stats against terrible teams. He had 3.5 sacks against Virginia Tech, 3.5 tackles for loss against Virginia Tech. He had 3 tackles for loss at Nebraska. He had 2 tackles for loss at Michigan. And if you go back and watch that game, they were not garbage minute tackles for loss. They were in real situations. He had a sack against Ohio State, 2 sacks against Michigan, a half a sack against Iowa, had a sack against Syracuse, sack against Virginia Tech. He never had a single game with more than 2 sacks. And the reason I bring that up is because sometimes you'll have guys that get a lot of sacks, then they do it all in one game. If you guys remember when Jerry Tillery back in 2018 for Notre Dame had 8 sacks, led their team with 8 sacks that year. Well, I believe half of his sacks came in one game against Stanford. He had 4 against Stanford. He went the next 6 weeks without recording a single sack. When you look at Nick Scourton's production, it's week after week after week after week after week he's producing in the Big Ten. So I think both of those guys play against good competition and are good football players. You've got to make sure that they don't dominate the game. Nick Scourton's going to have a tackle for loss or 2. He's probably going to have a sack. You've got to make sure that they're not bad sacks. If you're at your own 42-yard line and it's 3rd and 9 and you've got to try to, and he gets a sack, fine, you take the sack, you punt the ball, you let your defense work. What it can't be is that sack when you're backed up and you've got to punt from your own 2, and now they're flipping the field, they're getting the ball at midfield. It can't be a sack that results in a turnover where they get a short field. It can't be a sack that knocks you out of field goal range or gets you out of scoring range. You've got to avoid the bad sacks. Sacks are going to happen in this game. You got to avoid the bad ones. And that's going to be the key for Notre Dame is in this game is don't let them take the game over. That's the key. Don't let them have the drive killers. And that's what we're going to be. The other one for me is Tyreek Chappell. He's a very interesting player because he's not your typical Mike Elko fit. And one of the things that I look at this matchup is I don't know where he's going to play. They list him as a starter at one of the corner spots, but then they also list him as a starter at nickel. Does he play outside? Does he play nickel? If he plays in the nickel, that creates some matchup problems for Notre Dame. Because I believe I actually like him in the slot. I didn't see him play in the slot last year. I only saw him outside, but I think his game fits the slot really well. He's a physical player. He had a play last year. I think it was against Tennessee where they ran a little wide now screen that they run, and a corner's blocking him, and he's a strong kid. He kind of holds the guy in with one hand and then reaches out and grabs the receiver with the other hand and just doesn't let go. And he's a tough kid against the run. He's a physical corner. He doesn't have great long speed. That's why I kind of like him in the nickel because he's a tough kid. I think he could present you some issues in the slot. And he's a guy, too, that could be someone that they bring on some edge fires and things like that. He's the one DB that I look at and say, he could take some guys out with how he plays, and you've got to make sure you don't let him do that. You've got to either, run good routes against him and make plays against him, but then also do some things that maybe if he is playing a lot of nickel, which is kind of, I believe, new for him. I don't remember seeing him, and I broke down maybe 5 A&M games from last year. Didn't see him at nickel in any of those games. If he is playing a lot of nickel, you've got to do things to put him in stressful situations that he hasn't seen before. And that's where nickel's a lot different than playing outside. Outside, kind of everything's inside of you. And nickel, you got to have your head on a swivel because things are coming from outside and inside. Motions have a much bigger impact on a nickel than they do an outside corner. And so I would do some things to stress him. And if you don't, he's the kind of guy that can make some big plays and really hurt your offense. So those are my game wreckers for the matchup between the Notre Dame offense and the Texas A&M defense. Those are some players that I think Notre Dame is going to have step up in this game, and those are some guys that A&M they're going to have to prevent from A&M from taking over. And those are aspects of it that you look at. And we'll get into the offensive one next. But before we do, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as always, sign up for the message board at boards.archbreakdown.com. So let's get into the next part of this matchup, and that is the game wreckers on the Notre Dame defense against the game wreckers on the A&M offense. And this is going to be a big one as well, because to win a game like this, you need to do two things. One, somewhat negate the advantages that they have. And if they're great on the D line, you've got to not let them dominate you there. Even if you lose the battle, you've got to make it to where you win some. You know, you may lose the war, but you win some of the battles, right? That's probably a better way of saying it. Because if you win some of the battles but lose the war, means they made more plays than you did. But with your skill talent, you also, on some of those wins, you made some big plays. The other side of the ball is where you say, okay, the other part of winning this is you've got to then dominate the areas where you have the matchup advantage. And that's going to be a big part of this game. And so this is where the game wreckers kind of come into conversation. And it really begins here with Riley Mills. We know who Howard Cross is. Duke knows who Howard Cross is. The offensive line coach for Texas A&M is the offensive line coach from who was at Duke last year. He remembers Howard Cross having 13 tackles, I think 3.5 tackles for loss, and a couple sacks in that game, a sack in that game. He remembers Howard Cross making the strip at the end of the game that knocked Riley out and Leonard out and basically ended any chance they had at competing for the ACC title last year. They're going to have a plan for Howard Cross. They're not going to let Howard Cross beat them again. That means Riley Mills has to step up and be a game wrecker. I've said it a million times. You guys have heard it. I know I'm a broken record on things like this, but it matters. As a quarterback, as an offensive coach, if my team got dominated up the middle, there wasn't a lot we could do. And if Notre Dame is going to really dominate this matchup the way that they need to, they've got to dominate up the middle. And I think Riley Mills is going to play a big role in that. When Riley Mills is on his game, he's unblockable. I mean, he really is. The problem is he's not always on his game. Is he going to be on his game this weekend against Texas A&M? We're going to find out. But he's a game wrecker to me that needs to step up. If Riley is the player he's capable of, it makes it very hard to stop Howard Cross. It also makes it very hard for you as a staff, as an offensive staff, to not only stop him, but then also have the linebackers not win on the blitzes and the pressures that they bring. Stopping the two tackles is key to success for Texas A&M, which means not being stopped and dominating are keys for Notre Dame. And I believe Riley Mills is the biggest key for that. If he goes off, A&M's going to have a very tough time moving the ball. Go watch the game against USC last year. The edges played well, everybody played well for Notre Dame. But Riley Mills and Howard Cross were just unstoppable, and especially Riley Mills. He was tremendous in that game, and because he's 6'5", he's a good athlete, and he's really long. And when he gets up in the pocket and he gets those big paws up, life gets real uncomfortable for quarterbacks. And we saw that last year against USC when Riley Mills just absolutely dominated the USC offensive line. My wife, it's kind of funny. My wife, who did photography for that game, and she has like 5 different photos of Riley Mills trying to tackle Caleb Williams. And I went back and looked at them because I'm like, are these all from like one play? They were all from different plays. He made life really hard on Caleb Williams. And when you look at that game, Riley Mills had 4 pressures and 1 sack. Howard Cross had 5 pressures that included a sack and another hit on the quarterback. Like, that's the kind of production you want. And when they were dominant, then that also opened up opportunities for the linebackers to have run-throughs and get pressures on the quarterback. And so that's going to be a huge, huge key for this game. The next one is going to be the edge players. And I don't know who it is. It doesn't have to be RJ Oben. It doesn't have to be Batoho. It doesn't have to be Bubakar. It doesn't have to be Josh Burnham. It doesn't have to be Bryce Young. It doesn't have to be Junior Telemaka. I don't really care who it is. But Notre Dame's edge players have got to be good in this game. They've got to make some big plays. They've got to be game wreckers in this game. A&M is going to run a lot on the outside, and this isn't just about rushing the quarterback. The way that A&M is going to run the football with Colin Klein. They put your defensive ends in a lot of binds, a lot of tough situations. You've got to be strong against the edge. You've got to be great edge setters. You've got to be great at getting off crack blocks and down blocks. You've got to get to the football. You've got to rush the quarterback. This is going to be one of the most stressful games the defensive ends play all year with the scheme that A&M is going to run with Colin Klein. If you don't have the ability to dominate at the point of attack, or at least win at the point of attack consistently, then they're going to gash you and they're going to run the ball on you, and you cannot let that happen. And then, of course, when you get into passing situations, they need to make plays. They absolutely have to make plays. And that was a big part of last year's USC game as well. As good as the inside players were, and they were great, Javonte Jean-Baptiste had 6 pressures in that game. Boubacar Traore came in literally for 2 plays, and he came in for 1 pass play. And on that 1 pass play, he had a sack. That's what you need to do. If you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers against USC last year, Notre Dame had 33 pressures in that game. They had 14 total hits on the quarterback. You've got to do that in this game. You've got to have that level of success in this game. And if they're playing well, then the linebackers get a feast. That's really what it boils down to. When the linebackers struggle to get to the quarterback, a lot of times it has to do with the fact that the defensive line is just not playing at a high level. When the D-line plays at a high level, the linebackers are going to eat. That's what it boils down to. So I don't have any linebackers here on my game records conversation because, yeah, they're important and they got to play well. We'll talk about them a little bit tomorrow, but I don't need them to dominate this game. I need the boys up front to dominate this game. That's where if Notre Dame's going to win this one, that's what's got to happen. And the other part of the game records for the Notre Dame defense is going to be Christian Gray. Look, Xavier Watts, All-American. Benjamin Morrison's a dude. A&M knows that, right? They need somebody to step up and make a play. They are going to go at Christian Gray. They're going to motion at him. They're going to try to throw deep at him. They're going to throw screens at him. They're going to try to run their buck sweep and toss sweep plays at him. They're going to try to make him be a dude in this game. And if he's not a dude, then they're going to make some plays. If he is a dude, then they're going to struggle. They're going to absolutely go after Christian Gray in this game. I have no doubt in my mind that they're going to go after Christian Gray in this game, which means he's got to be ready for it and play well. Like, think about this. How do you have success throwing the football on Notre Dame if you can't beat Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts, which most people can't, but then Christian Gray is playing to his potential? Honestly, how do you stop that Notre Dame team at that point in time? Or how do you move it? The answer is you struggle. I mean, we saw that with Ohio State. Ohio State with Marvin Harrison and Jackson Smith and Jigba for a half, and Emeka Egbuka and all the players they had the last 2 years scored 21 points and 17 points against Notre Dame. Why? Because they couldn't throw the ball. And some of the throws they had in 2022 were about C.J. Stroud just saying, like I said about Riley Leonard, there's just a couple throws where C.J. Stroud said, okay, got to take the Clark Kent, costume off and be who I really am, and that's Superman, right? I mean, he made some plays. You're just like, tip your cap to that kid right there, because there's nothing you can do about that. There's no coaching point that you can say, do a better job here or there. It just, the only way you can stop that is if you know to play and you beat him to the spot. I mean, it was going to be hard to do. And when you look at Christian Gray this year, he's going to be that guy that they go at. They tried to test Benjamin Morrison in 2022, and he ate him up. They're going to test Christian Gray the same way this year, and he's going to have to step up run game wise and throwing game wise. That's what I say. It's not just like, I have no doubt that Christian Gray is going to be a very good pass cover guy this year. I have no doubt. If I'm wrong, I'll be shocked. Where I'm concerned about losing Cam Hart more than anything else is Cam was a phenomenal perimeter run and perimeter screen game defender. I mean, he was so good at that. Well, this is a game where they're going to do a lot of that at you. Can Christian step up and be a force player on against the run? Can he handle those type of situations with the perimeter screens? That's what I need to see. And if he plays as well as I think he can, then I think A&M's going to have a hard time scoring. I really do. If he doesn't, then it might be a little bit tougher. let's end this with the other side of the coin here, and that's A&M. And honestly, there's really two. You could talk about Connor Wegman. There's really two. There's two players that I look at and I say, these are guys that really concern me as potential game record players. And they both play receiver. The first one for me is Cyrus Allen. He's a kid that transferred in from Louisiana Tech. You know, I know Carter Carrells and I were on the show the other day, and I don't know if he talked about it last night with Sean, but one of the things we talked about when we were talking about the receiving core is he did have some drop issues at Louisiana Tech, and I went back and looked at that, and he did. He had 7 drops last year, and that's fine. But here's the deal. You live with that if you're a coaching staff because he's a playmaker. Last year at Louisiana Tech, he had 46 catches for 778 yards, 16.9 per catch, 4 touchdowns. He's from the same league as Chris Mitchell. The year before, in 2022, he only had 22 catches, but he went for 500 yards at 22.7 per catch, and he had 4 touchdowns. So in 2 years, the kid has only caught 68 passes, but he's got 8 touchdowns, and he's averaged around just under 20 yards a catch. And you've got to make sure that you don't allow him to do that in this game. You cannot allow him to come out and be that down the field game wrecker. And and he's a guy that has done it at times against Power 5 teams. In 2022, Louisiana Tech started the season off playing at Missouri, and Cyrus Allen had 5 catches for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. You can't let him do that to you if you're Notre Dame. And I'll be honest, the one position on this defense that I'm most concerned about is nickel. And I think Jordan Clark's a solid player. I'm concerned against matchups where he's playing faster players. And how can he handle that? And then when you look at this particular defense or this particular offense, the slot is a very important part of this offense. He will have some stuff designed for him tomorrow or on Saturday. And I know there's a chance we may see like Terry Bussey in that role and things like that. But the Cyrus Allen kid is the one that concerns me because he can be that game wrecker where you have one missed tackle on a slant or a screen, and all of a sudden it's a 40-yard gain. You know, he's the kind of guy that can in a post snap switch, or maybe the outside guy runs like an inside, takes the post out, do sort of like a wheel route, come off that guy on the outside, get some kind of go concept there. He's the kind of guy where you can scheme up, sort of some backside clear routes, and you can bring him on a stack motion, and then he runs a deep over route behind the backers in front of the safeties where it's just you versus the nickel running across the field. He can win in those situations, and that's where my concern is, because I don't think that A&M is a team that's going to be able to move the ball consistently against Notre Dame and just up and down the field, but they have a shot to make some big plays and completely flip the field with big plays and get points off big plays. Notre Dame can't allow that. And the 2 guys that most concern me are these receivers, first one being Cyrus Allen and the second one being Noah Thomas. I like Noah Thomas. He's not a burner, but you can't teach 6'6". You can't teach a huge catch radius. He's a kid that is developing as a player. He's still young. He's still learning. I think he's going to be a junior this year, I believe. I could be incorrect on that, but I think last year was a sophomore season. And he's a guy that, kind of emerged a little bit last season, had 5 catches for 51 yards and 2 touchdowns as a freshman in 2022. Comes out last year, 29 catches, 359 yards, 5 touchdowns, a lot of quick stuff. I don't think they used him overly well. He's a guy to me that I want running vertical stuff, comebacks, out cuts, go routes, post routes, deep overs, where I'm just going to say, hey, one-on-one, throw it up. That's what I'm concerned about. Ja'Day Walker's a guy that you got to be concerned about. I had Moose Muhammad on my preseason second-team all-opponent squad. He's a guy to look at. The reason I'm going with Noah Thomas in this particular matchup is because my concern is if you're very sticky in coverage like Notre Dame is, there's those situations where you get that 40-yard gain because that guy's just 6'6" and he outplayed you for the football. That's my concern if you hit a couple of those plays. I think of the play that Javon Weems had against Notre Dame in 2017 when Georgia came to Notre Dame and beat Notre Dame by a point. One of the big plays of that game was that go route that they hit up the sideline where Notre Dame was in pretty good position. I forget who the corner was on that particular play, but he was in pretty good position. But Javon Weems just went up and outplayed him for the football. And that changed the game. right? Georgia didn't consistently move the ball on Notre Dame that game, but they made that one big play down the field, and that changed things a little bit. You can't let those plays happen, and Noah Thomas is a guy that I'm concerned about. Can be that type of player, and you can't allow him to have those type of things. So that's something that that I'm excited about. Notre Dame being able to have the talent to stop, but I'm not excited about because I know those type of things can happen, and so it's like, you can see that's where my angst comes from. It's just those one-on-one plays where you just get outplayed for the football, and they just go make a play on you. You've got to try to limit those. They may hit one or two, but you can't let those happen more than that. And we're going to see if Notre Dame can stop it, because that's the game wreckers for me. That's really it. The other stuff, it just comes down to don't make mistakes. Like a running back hitting backside on an inside zone where you had a bad run fit. That's not him being a game wrecker. That's you making a mistake. These are guys that to me are just, they can outplay you for the football. They can outrun you to the football. They can outrun you to a spot, or just outjump you for a pass. Those are the plays that I look at that get you concerned, because if you start just getting beat on stuff, because you can clean up mistakes. That Bud run fit guy cut it back for 30-yard game. Okay, get on the board. You make the correction, and you don't make that mistake again. But if a six guy is just outplaying you for the football 3 or 4 times, like, okay, I don't know how you scheme that. Okay, we got to have safety help out. Okay, but now you don't have that help down the seam. So, they run a play action pass, and your safety is screaming off the hash to get over top because you keep getting the outside. And that's when that seam route to the tight end comes wide open, and boom, you've got a big play there. Because if you're going to do something to take away something I'm beating you with, I'm going to have answers for how I'm going to attack you based on how you take that away. And that's when you start getting in trouble. If you can stop them and shut down those plays, then I don't know how A&M moves the ball outside of you just making mistakes. And so those are my game wreckers for the Notre Dame and Texas A&M game. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm curious who you guys have as your game wreckers. Go ahead and throw those into the chat. Who are the Notre Dame players that you believe have a chance to really be those game wreckers for Notre Dame? And who are the players for Texas A&M that concern you the most in regard to them being game wreckers for the Aggies? It's going to be a very, very important part of this type of game. So hit that like, folks. Hit that subscribe. Hit that notification bell. We're going to go to the buy, sell, hold next, so get ready for that. We're going to rock through those and have some fun with those. Some very, very good submissions. And then, of course, as always, folks, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Final part of today's show, folks, is we're going to dive into the buy, sell, hold. You guys know the drill. The submissions are generated by our subscribers at Irish Breakdown. And so we have a thread that goes up. My guy Salty puts it up every Tuesday. You guys hit your submissions during the season. It's a little tougher to get to all of them, so I have to make some choices on ones that I pass on. So some are, I got kind of multiple submissions about the same thing, so I'll just take one of them. There's some that I really liked, but they were more down the road. And then some others I wasn't able to fit all of them into the show, but there were some great submissions. I'm going to try to go back later tonight and respond to the ones that I didn't bring up in the show. And then the other way to get a buy, sell, hold submitted is that you submit a super chat, which we appreciate. And then we do have 3 super chats here real quick. Zach Martin, stars don't matter on Saturdays. One play, one life. Love it, man. Absolutely love it. Thank you for the super chat, Zach Martin. And you are correct. It's just going to come down to how guys play on Saturday. Stars do not define you. Sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they don't. It's about the talent. That's ultimately what matters. Iden Benami with a super chat. Thank you, Iden. A big deal with Chance Tucker's injury. Slim at cornerback. Is it Saturday? First of all, I'm not concerned about. Let me say, I'm bummed about the injury for Chance Tucker. For Chance, Chance is one of my just love his family. Great kid. Everything you want a Notre Dame kid to be about. Has had opportunities to transfer. Wanted to see it through. Wanted to get the Notre Dame degree. Loved being part of this team. And he was a kid that went down with an injury and just in a bad way, and you just feel terrible for him. The reality is Leonard Moore was basically had passed him up already, or was on the verge of passing him up. So it doesn't really affect the 2 deep at all. And, yes, if you have another injury or 2, it could be a problem. but I'm comfortable with where the cornerback depth chart is right now. I mean, Chance was battling for the number 4 corner spot. Notre Dame only really needs to play 3, and his hold on the 4th cornerback spot, if he even still had it, was tenuous, and he was going to lose it. And I don't even like talking about that too much because I feel like I'm being down on Chance, and I'm not. I love that kid, but Leonard Moore's just a really talented player, and he was going to pass him up. But I love Chance's competitiveness and just an awesome kid, and I hate to see him go down. But I'm not concerned about cornerback depth until they lose another guy, maybe 2. Then I start getting a little bit nervous. AST 12321. Brian, has there been any feedback on how Knapp has handled Notre Dame's first team D, including exotic blitzes and stunts? Well, I mean, I haven't heard anything specific beyond just the only thing I've heard is that he has been their most consistent player there. And that means that kid, that doesn't, I'm not told this, but that can only mean that he's handling himself well. You know, consistency is what you look for in an offensive lineman, that he was more consistent than the other tackles. And that's why he's playing. It's not about upside or potential or anything like that. It's about right now, he's their best guy. And that's why he beat out Tosh Baker. And from what I was told, it was not really all that close. Like once Knapp got in there and started getting reps, it was kind of over pretty quick there. And we'll see if it's the right choice or not. But I mean, I was told this by multiple people. He just was steady. He was just consistent. And then the other thing about him that I heard is he's very strong. He's one of their more strong. I know one show I said he's their 3rd strongest. That was a mistake on my part. I misspoke. I meant to say one of the strongest. I don't know if he's 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, but he's in that top group from what I'm told. Is just pure strength. So, I mean, if he was struggling to handle Notre Dame's front, then I highly doubt he'd be starting. But as far as specifics, AST, I don't have any real specifics to that as far as like how he's done specifically against the zone, the pressures and the stunts that Notre Dame does. So let's get to the buy, sell, hold, and we're going to kick things off with Cousin Eddie's mobile home. It's got 4 submissions here. So we're going to rapid fire through these. Buy, sell, hold. The Notre Dame O-line outperforms Texas A&M's O-line. I hope so. I mean, I'm going to buy that as an optimistic buy. I don't know that that's how it's going to play out, but I buy that as a potential, as a possibility. It certainly can be that way, and that's going to what it comes down to, right? Like not only which D-line plays better, but which O-line plays better is going to be a big part of this. Buy, sell, hold. Notre Dame's D-line plays as well, if not better than A&M's D-line. Well, those two things kind of go hand in hand, right? If Notre Dame's O-line outperforms A&M's O-line, then that means Notre Dame's D-line outplayed A&M's D-line. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. Buy, sell, hold. Riley Leonard outplays Connor Wegman. I buy that. If it doesn't happen, then that's where Notre Dame could kind of run into some problems. And then buy, sell, hold. Notre Dame wins by 2+ scores and opens some, not all, eyes. There's a couple others like this, and I would love to buy that. It's certainly possible, but I'm going to sell that because my prediction will not have Notre Dame winning by, well, I'm going to hold that until tomorrow, my friend. I'm going to hold that till my prediction comes out for tomorrow. But is it possible for Notre Dame to win by 2+ scores? Sure. Am I saying it's a given? No, it's definitely not a given. Just like they could lose the game. We'll see how it plays out. But I'm going to hold off on that one until my score prediction comes out for tomorrow. Ball Peen Shillelagh. Buy, sell, hold. The great one, Jaden Greathouse, has 7+ catches and 2+ touchdown catches at Texas A&M. Dude, I hope that's right. That's a lot of production. 7+ catches, minimum 7 and 2. I'll tell you this: if he does that, this game won't be close. I will absolutely say that. I'm gonna sell that one. That's a ton of production. That's a lot. I'm gonna sell that, but I think it's certainly possible. Buy, sell, hold. The great one is named the MVP of the Texas A&M game. Again, I hope that's accurate. I'm going to sell it because I think it's going to be somebody else. I think it's going to be Riley Leonard or someone on the defense, but I'm okay if it's Jaden Greathouse. And then buy, sell, hold. The great one is already in the Heisman conversation after week 1. I'll definitely sell that one. Even if he has 7 catches and 2 touchdowns, he's not going to be in the Heisman conversation after 1 week. So no matter how much some of us Jaden Greathouse fans would like to think so. Yeah. Next one from Brother Thomas. Thank you, Brother Thomas. By so whole, Notre Dame wins by double digits, and the narrative from haters goes from Notre Dame is not that good to Notre Dame is still not that good, but Texas A&M is just worse. Okay, I'm not buying this based on the wins by double digits. I'm buying the premise of if they win by double digits, the narrative goes from Notre Dame is not that good to Notre Dame is still not that good, but Texas A&M is just worse. I am going to sell that in the areas above the Mason-Dixon line and out west, and I'm going to sell it down south because up north and the Northeast, the narrative will be big win by Notre Dame. If they win by what you said, double digits, it'll be great win by Notre Dame. No question. What will be stated by the people like Paul Feinbaum and the SEC crowd is, oh, well, A&M's not that good. You guys know this. Notre Dame is not going to get respect for beating SEC teams until we see them beat Georgia or Bama. Because Notre Dame fans will say Notre Dame doesn't win games like this. Despite the fact Notre Dame has won 2 bowl games over LSU in the last decade, despite the fact they beat South Carolina in a bowl game, despite the fact they've beaten everybody in the SEC not named Alabama or Georgia when they've played, then the reality is you're just not going to get that respect until you beat one of the 2 quote-unquote big dogs. That's the reality of it. So up north, Notre Dame will get respect for that. Down south in SEC territory, they will not. It will be about A&M not being that good, 100%. Paul Feinbaum's going to get on his channel and spew his utter nonsense about A&M's not that good, and he'll say whatever he needs to say to get people to click on his links and to watch his show, because there's no actual seriousness analysis there. There's no serious analysis there. It's all clickbait. And so the narrative will 100% be A&M's just not that good. And then if A&M goes on a run, and let's say that A&M wins their – Chief Brody, I'm not at all surprised that you liked Paul Feinbaum. I love you, man, but I am not even remotely surprised that you just said you like Paul Feinbaum. It fits with a lot of what you feel about Notre Dame. There's no doubt. I love you, man, but that's just a fact. But let's be honest about something else. If A&M loses to Notre Dame, and let's look at the rest of Texas A&M's schedule. Let's say that Texas A&M goes on a run and they win a bunch of games. And let's say they beat Florida in 2 weeks on the road. Let's say they beat Arkansas in Arlington in end of September, beat Missouri at home, beat LSU at home, beat Auburn on the road, and beat Texas in the final game. And let's say they go 11-1 and they're getting ready to play Georgia for the SEC title. You know darn well that ESPN and especially the people on the SEC network and SEC fans and SEC analysts will simply say, bet you Notre Dame doesn't want to play Texas A&M now. It won't be, man, Notre Dame beat that really good Texas A&M team. It will be, well, A&M may have lost then, but they're a different team now. And you know why I know that ESPN is going to say that? Because that's exactly what they said in 2018. Notre Dame beats Michigan at home to start the 2018 season. Only won by a touchdown, was never that close. It was 21-3 at one point in time. But at the end of the year, before the Ohio State game, freaking Kirk Herbstreit goes on his show and basically tries to argue that Michigan should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame, even though that Notre Dame won the head-to-head, convincingly so in a lot of instances, because, well, that was back then. They're a different team now. They weren't a different team, as Ohio State showed the next weekend when they absolutely dominated Michigan and hung a 60 spot on them. But that's the narrative, and that will absolutely be the narrative if A&M loses to Notre Dame, even if it's by 20 points, and goes on a run and wins 10 or 11 games. It will be, well, Notre Dame only beat them early. They wouldn't beat them now. That will be the narrative. So in a lot of people, now a lot of Northern folks, Big Ten folks, I think they will give more credit to Notre Dame because it fits their narrative. But that's absolutely how it'll be played out. That's absolutely how it'll play out in that type of situation. So it'll just depend on where you go. That's absolutely right. All right, let's get to some more from this one. For Southside Chirish, By so hold Notre Dame goes for over 350 yards of total offense against A&M. I'm by that. I don't know that it's going to be a lot over 350, but I do think they're going to go over 350. By so hold the 26th Notre Dame recruiting class will receive at least 4 more commitments by Thanksgiving. Absolutely by that. I think they'll certainly get to 4. Greg Nielsen, by so hold, typically position coaches get a fair amount of latitude in determining who will start, but the decision to start a true freshman at left tackle indicates Joe Rudolph, Mike Denbrock, and Marcus Freeman at minimum came to a consensus that Knapp won the job. Absolutely buy that, Greg. Look, is this a situation where Joe Rudolph determined that he wanted Anthony Knapp to be the left tackle? Believe so, yes. If Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman don't agree with that, guess what? Anthony Knapp's not starting a left tackle. Simple as that. That's a very important. Just like if Gino Guidugli was like, "Hey, I think we should start Steve Angeli quarterback," he didn't. I'm just using an example. Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman were like, "Yeah, I'm glad you feel that way, but that's not happening." Riley Leonard's our quarterback. Same thing here. And I don't care if Mike Denbrock's the tight ends coach, receivers coach, quarterback. He's the offensive coordinator. He's ultimately in charge of everyone that plays. If Mike Denbrock wants to overrule Dylan McCullough on who he's going to have at running back on a play, he does. Same at receiver, same at tight end, of course, because it's his position, and same in the offensive line. But also in a situation like this, where you're not only talking about your left tackle, but you're talking about starting a true freshman at left tackle who's going to protect the blind side of your franchise quarterback. You know Marcus Freeman was part of that conversation. So the only way Anthony Knapp starts at left tackle is if they all agreed that he gives them the best chance to have the best offensive line they can have. No question. No question. So I'm definitely buying that, Greg. That's a good submission. Next one from Greg. I believe he had 2. For quarterbacks, by so hold, for quarterbacks, a transition from a spread system to a pro style system is more difficult than a transition from a pro style to a spread. I'm going to sell that, Greg, because it just depends on the quarterback. You know, there are some guys that could go from spread to pro style and do just fine. And other guys are going to need more time to transition. It just depends on who you are and what your specific skill set are. If you're a very athletic quarterback who's playing in a spread system or a pro style system, you're not going to have a super tough transition going to a spread. If you're a guy that does some of those things. And then if you're a guy that just drops back and throw it, there's going to be some stuff in the spread. The thing that I feel like maybe Sam Hartman's transition issue, quote unquote, issues factor in. I don't think Sam Hartman had really bad transition issues. If you go look at Sam Hartman, his 4 best games were his first 4 games. I believe that and his offense also is very unique with that slow mesh. Very, very unique technique. I think actually, if anything, I would argue that going from pro style to spread is more difficult because your footwork changes so much more when you're doing your play action and handoffs in a spread than what it does. Your reads change dramatically. There's a lot to it. So I actually would argue it's the opposite, but I don't think it's by a ton. I think they're both require technical transitions and read transitions that make it a challenge, but good quarterbacks and smart quarterbacks can obviously get it done. Let's get down here to some more buy-sell holds. We have one from 3rd and 7 duo. Buy-sell hold. Both coordinators win their respective Coach of the Year awards. I don't believe that there are 2 assistant coach awards. I believe that there's 1. I could be wrong on this, but I believe there's 1, and any coach can win it. So I don't know that that's even possible. But I did in my bold prediction have that one of the coordinators will win the Broyles Award, which goes to the top assistant. So I at least buy one of them. The second one says, with weather looking to be a non-factor, Kyle Field will be a non-factor by the 4th quarter. Well, I still think weather's going to be a factor. I don't think it's a non-factor, but it won't be the factor that people made it out to be, number one. But it's still a factor. But if we buy your premise, Kyle Field will be a non-factor if Notre Dame plays better. I mean, if it's a close game in the 4th quarter, Kyle Field, and what I believe you mean by that is the loudness and the size of the crowd will not be. It'll be a factor. if it's a close game. If Notre Dame's up by 17, 20 points, then guess what? It won't be a factor. I've watched Michigan State games where in the fourth quarter, Michigan had trouble communicating and seeing, and getting into their rhythm because of how loud the crowd was at Spartan Stadium. Well, the last time I was at Spartan Stadium back in 2017, not only was it not a factor in the fourth quarter, half their fans had left by the time we got to the fourth quarter because Notre Dame was beating them so bad. And so, of course, then it wasn't a factor. It was a factor when I was there in 2010. So in a much more competitive game. So it just depends on what the score is. And that's always true, to be honest with you. Now, if you're saying like, okay, but I think the game won't be close by then, well, I hope you're right. I just think it's going to be a little bit more competitive than that. But I hope that I hope to be wrong. I hope this is not a close game. I don't like close games. It can be stressful. Absolutely can be stressful. 3rd and 7 duo also says Notre Dame's home field and weather. This is an interesting one. When I put this in, I was looking forward to getting to this one. Notre Dame's home field and weather advantage in December is greater than Southern teams have at the beginning of the season. It's harder to adapt to cold coming from the South than heat coming from the North. I actually agree with that. And there are things you can do because like with the heat from in the South, it's not so much the heat that gets you, it's your conditioning level and your preparation, your hydration, your nutrition, and all those type of things. You can like there, and I know that there's a lot made of it, and I understand that, and I'm not saying it's easy, but the reality is it's not what people made it out to be. If you're proper conditioned, if you have a good rotation, if you have a game plan in place that kind of plays into it, if your players are properly hydrated for the 2 weeks before, all those things factor in, you can handle the heat. It is much harder to prepare for cold because it's not a conditioning thing. And honestly, it's as much a mental thing. Like going from 80 degrees in South Bend to 95 in Texas is not the kind of jump that going from 60 degrees in Florida to 10 degrees in December in South Bend. It's a much different deal. And we've seen examples of this in the past. I mean, even in a bowl game, do you guys remember the 2010 Sun Bowl when Miami shows up and it's cold? It had snowed the night before. Notre Dame players are out there on the field in short sleeve shirts. And the Miami kids are coming out on the field with, their faces covered, long sleeve, and they wanted no part of that cold. You can't turn your heat down, your air conditioner down to 35 in your indoor facility. You just can't do it. So absolutely, it's more in that case, it's more of a challenge. If you are coming up to, below freezing weather, that's hard, man. That's really, really hard. There's no doubt. Liquid Gold ND, buy, so hold. Notre Dame's defense will score at least one touchdown and force 2 turnovers against A&M. I mean, I'm buying it's possible. I don't know that I'm going to predict it, but I'm buying it's possible. And I think it would certainly be big for Notre Dame. There's no question about it. Absolutely can be big for Notre Dame. I want to go back to address something, too, from before, because somebody just said, Robert Bishop said, I disagree. You can always put more clothes on. You can only take off so many layers before the law gets called. That's actually not something I agree with, because in football, players want to wear as little as possible. I mean, knees don't even get covered anymore. Football players do not want to put a lot of layers on. And when you're a skill player, for example, and you've got to put multiple layers on, and your body can start overheating and not reacting well to that when it's cold outside. There's a lot of your hands get, even with gloves on, your hands get tighter because your skin shrinks when it's cold. It can be harder to grip a football, especially a cold football, because it becomes very hard to handle that. It can be hard to kick a cold football. Your muscles tighten when you're that cold. You can put as many clothes on as you want, but you can't put parkas on when you're out there running routes, right? So I disagree that you can do that it is that way. And I'm speaking to you as someone who has coached and played in the South and someone who's coached and played in the North. I've done both. I've played in Ohio. I've played in Florida and everywhere in between. I've coached in Texas. I've coached in Florida, or actually not Florida. I've coached in North Carolina. I've coached in Kentucky, and I've coached in Ohio. I've coached in Pennsylvania. I'm just telling you, there's no doubt that playing in the cold is far more impactful on you as a person than playing in heat. It's just way different. Way different. So, and again, I've lived in Florida. I've coached in Texas. I've coached up north, and I've lived up north. When you talk about for football players, it is very different. Very, very different. Back to liquid gold. The national media will be praising the athleticism of the Notre Dame linebackers after the A&M game. If Notre Dame dominates them, yes, I will buy that. Yes. I think that's one of the things that they're going to be if Notre Dame's defense shuts A&M down, a big part of it will be the linebackers play well. And Jack Kaiser's very athletic. Drake's athletic. Kingston's very athletic for his size, especially. Jaden Alsbury's going to play. Jalen Sneed. It's a very athletic secondary or linebacking core. Absolutely. Very, very, very challenging. Aggie Kid says that sounds like something a northern native would say. Call me what you want, but I played high school football in Norfolk, Virginia. I played college football in North Carolina, and I also spent an entire semester in Florida playing spring ball in Florida. I've coached in Texas. You can say whatever you want, but I promise you I've spent more time at football games in the South in heat than you've spent at football games in the North when it's cold. I promise you that. Promise you that. Let's get to some more here. We got from, come on. Here we go again. This is really annoying. I don't know why it decides it wants to do that sometimes. It just won't. There we go. Buy so hold from Do It to It. This is a long one. Buy so hold that Joe Rudolph has shown an early sign this season that he's the right coach for the job, going with the inexperienced but talented group. It would have been easy to play the older guys, and if they fail, just say, oh, well, maybe next year. He's put a target on himself, betting on his coaching and the overall talent. I'm going to sell that. Could it be the case? Sure, it could be the case. But I don't think just making the decision to start younger players answers this question. What if, let's just say, like early in camp, this is what we would see. One day we'd see Rocco at left guard. One day we see Rocco at right guard. One day so we would see Pat Coogan at left guard. The next day we see Pat Coogan at right guard. Next day we'd see Pat Coogan at center. We saw Sam Pendleton every day at center. And then when he moved to left guard, he only played left guard. What if moving Coogan and Rocco around made it harder for them to get into a rhythm, but Pendleton playing only one spot for the last 3 weeks allowed him to be more effective? What if that's the reason this happened? I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying is there's a lot that could have gone into this circumstance that could have led to the end result. That's not just Joe Rudolph's the guy. And what if he made a mistake? Just because he went with the younger players, which we have argued for in the past, doesn't mean it's the right decision. We're not going to know that till the game gets played. Now, Do It to It. Could it be the right decision? Could it show that he's the guy if this line plays really well? Yes. It would show that. It would mean he had the guts to make this decision and go out there and perform, and the line plays great. Awesome. But just making the move doesn't mean it was the right move. We've got to find out if it's the right move first before we start saying that. So I understand where you're coming from, but I'm going to sell that. Smell Rod, buy, sell, hold. Cross and or Mills break through the line and catch a running back in the backfield to force a fumble to set Notre Dame up with field position inside the Texas A&M before the half. That is without a doubt the most specific buy, sell, hold I have ever had. That is great. And I'm going to buy it just because of the thought that you put into that and the specificness nature of that. I'm going to buy that. I love that. And I hope that that's exactly how that happens. So I'm buying the heck out of that one. Next buy, sell, hold from Smell Rod. Notre Dame will go 3 for 3 for field goals on the night. Let's see here. I could see that. That kind of tracks with what I'm thinking from Notre Dame standpoint. So, yeah, we'll see that. I'm trying to think of the 3 for 3. Actually, I believe that Mitch. I always want to call him Derek Jeter. That's my bad. Mitch Jeter. I believe he's kicked at Kyle Field before, but I don't know how many kicks he had at Kyle Field. So let's actually look at this one real quick. Place kicking, field goals at Texas A&M. So he went 1 for 1 at Texas A&M last year, 2 for 2 on PATs. And he went 1 for 1 at home against A&M the year before that, and then did not kick there. So he's 1 for 1 there. So he's at least kicked in that stadium before. So, yeah, let's go with that one. And then there's 2 ways of looking at that. Either Notre Dame scores 2 touchdowns and they get 23 points from being 3 field goals, or they scored 21 points. They score 3 touchdowns and they get to 30. Either one I like. I hope it's not they score 1 touchdown and they only get 16. That would make me very nervous come the fourth quarter. But yeah, I can buy that. I can buy that. And then Notre Dame will have at least 3 receptions of 30-plus yards. I'm buying that because they have to. They're going to have a tough time winning if they don't get at least 3 of those. Yeah. Or at least if they win, it'll be a very low-scoring game. KJ Fergie buys a hold. Notre Dame's defense will not be as dominant statistically in the 24 year, despite being a better overall unit, because the Embrock's offense will move faster, score more often, and take more risks, leaving more opportunities for the D to give up yards and points than in 2023. That's certainly possible. I'm going to sell this simply so that I can be devil's advocate, because I think there's merit to what you're saying is, if you're scoring faster, scoring more points, then there's just going to be more opportunities for the other team to, do all that. But I'm going to sell it just so I can make this point. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it could also work out this way, where let's say that you are correct that Denbrock's offense moves faster and scores more often, and let's say takes more risks. Number one, I don't know that Denbrock's offense is going to take more risks. Being aggressive doesn't mean you're taking more risks. Taking risks are trying to throw certain routes at your own 5 that you probably shouldn't throw coming out of your end zone. And you throw a pick or something like that and they get a short field. I don't see that. But if the offense moves faster, scores faster, that also allows the defense to take maybe more quote-unquote risks, to be more aggressive, to pin their ears back. Because if Notre Dame's got big leads because their defense is playing well or their offense is playing well, then what that does is that forces teams to be a little bit more one-dimensional, and they got to throw the ball more, which is now playing into the best part of the Notre Dame defense. I would also counter with the other part of that is teams get a lot more points and yards late in games, but with the way that Notre Dame is recruited, you're going to be bringing in some. I mean, you're quote unquote, empty the bench defensive line, for example, is going to be Bryce Young, Brennan Vernon, Armel Mukam, Devin Houston, Junior Chilamaka maybe, Logan Thomas maybe some more snaps for Boubacar, Kingston Viliama-Asa, Preston Zinner. Your corners are going to be like Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs. Your safeties are going to be, maybe Bronte Johnson and Ben Minnick and Luke Talich and guys like that, Kennedy Urlacher. Like, those are some good players. So I don't know that it's going to necessarily mean that, because I think you could counter by saying the defense is even more aggressive because they know, hey, I can bring this pressure here knowing that it might give up a play, but it also might hit home and give us a big play, and we give the offense another short field, because I know if we make a mistake here, our offense can bail us out. That's how I'd look at it if I'm Al Golden, is I don't have to be as worried about fearing giving up the big play because I know our offense can protect us. So there's that angle to it as well, I'm simply selling it because of that, but I think there's merit to what you're saying. It could be a better unit, even if it doesn't necessarily look better on paper. KJ Fergie also says 2024 will be the year the national narrative changes and Notre Dame is no longer thought of as second tier, unable to seriously compete with the modern big boys of college football like Georgia, Bama et al. Buy. Based on my predictions for the season, buy. Absolutely buy. This game doesn't do that. but it's a buy. BK's last brain cell. 3 of them here. First one, buy us a hold. Drake Bowen will register 10-plus tackles and a sack or 2 tackles for loss in the season opener. I hope so. I'm going to sell that because that's putting a lot of pressure on a kid for his first career start. And I do think that they're going to rotate a lot, but I hope you're right. By so whole, Jordan Faison will record 5-plus receptions for a minimum of 63 yards. I'm going to sell that. I don't know that he'll get to 5-plus catches. I could see him at 63 yards, but the 5-plus catches, I'm not sure that I buy that one. I think it'd be more like if he has 63, 70 yards, it'll be on 3 or 4 catches because he'll have some big plays. And, I'd like to see that, though. I wouldn't mind that. Buy, sell, hold. Notre Dame will record at least 3 sacks. That one I definitely buy. Tatted up Irishman. Buy, sell, hold. 5 current Notre Dame wide receivers will collect an NFL paycheck to some degree. Practice squad, special teams, etc. I buy that. Now, not next year, but between Chris Mitchell, Jaden Greathouse, Bo Collins, Jaden Harrison, KK Smith, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate, and even Jaden Thomas. That's 9 guys that could potentially be there. So only 5 of them have to get there. I'll buy that. I buy that. Buy, sell, hold. 3 current running backs will do the same. Oh, I think 3 might even, if I was doing an over-under out on this, I'd probably go 3.5 as my set number, and I would still take the over. I think Jadarian and Jeremiah for sure, I think, are NFL players. And it won't shock me at all if both the freshmen spend time in the NFL. Because, again, your bar's low as far as the practice squad. I certainly see that. Yeah, I'm buying on both of those, to be honest with you. And then this last one is a little bit interesting. The backup O-line in 2025 would be a top 25 unit if they started, as long as no one transfers out. My first thought was, come on, bro. That's a little homerish. But then I started thinking about it. So let's say that the current starting offensive line is the starting offensive line for next year. So Knapp, Pendleton, Craig, Schrouth, and Wagner. So your backup offensive line would be Charles Jagasaw, and we'll assume the 2 seniors don't come back for 5th years for the sake of argument. Let's say left to right, you're going to be Jagasaw at left tackle. You're going to be Joe Otting at center, Gerby Lambert at right tackle, and your 2 tackles are most likely Sullivan Absher and Christopher Tarrick, who would then be juniors. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's a very talented group. Very talented group. So, yeah, and you said top 25 unit if they start. Yeah, I kind of buy that, man. I kind of buy that. Irishman 7114, between Notre Dame's stable of runners, including Leonard and wide receivers on jet sweeps, and suffocating defense, the O-line will lean on A&M's defense and eventually run for 170 yards and 3 touchdowns. I'm going to sell that, but man, I hope you're right. Because that's what they did to Ohio State last year. The difference between this year against A&M and last year against Ohio State is I think A&M has a bigger defensive line than Ohio State did. And that's why they were able to lean on Ohio State a little bit last year. I mean, their defensive line had some size to it at some spots, but overall it wasn't a really big offensive line. And even some of the guys that were listed a little bit bigger, I necessarily thought were like giant players. And some of them I thought maybe were a little bit, not as big as listed. But like Michael Hall, for example, was 6'2", 280. He wasn't a real big guy. Your defensive ends had some size to them, but they weren't as big as the guys that they have there now. You look at, obviously, Jack Sawyer is, let's see here. Where's Sawyer? All right. Got to go down here. So let's see. Sawyer was 6'4", 265. That's big, but that's not as big. JT Tuimoloa is 6'4", 270. I mean, A&M's 2 ends are listed at 6'80", 290. 280 and 290. You look at their other interior guys, obviously Tyleek Williams is a bigger kid. But he was listed at. They got a lot of Williams on their roster. I'm trying to go through it now. Let's see here. Where is Tyleek? Their roster is very difficult to manage. Give me a second. Why is this not giving me this thing by jersey number? All these ads on these schools' rosters are driving me crazy. Let's go here. But I know that Tyleek Williams was not they're really only their really big guy that they had last year on their depth chart. So here we go. Okay, now we got a traditional search here. Okay, so you look at their D tackles last year. Michael Hall 6'2", 280. Ty Hamilton 6'3", 295. You had Will Smith Jr. didn't play a ton. I don't think he even played that game. You had where is Tyleek? Here we go. Down here, Josh Mickens didn't play. Caden Davis didn't play. Trying to find some of their other ends because this roster is not loading the way that it should be. Ohio State, y'all need to get up on your roster. You need guys get your roster fixed. This isn't good. This isn't what I want to be. Tyleek Williams is listed as 6'2", 290. Hero Canoe was 6'4", 305. Tywone Malone was listed at 6'4", 303. Jaden McKenzie was 6'2", 286. See what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't a real big defensive line. A&M's a lot bigger. It's going to be harder to lean on them the same way you did Ohio State because they're going to be big. And Notre Dame's not as big this year as they were last year at some spots. So, and again, somebody asked, Doc Jack asked, have you addressed all the A&M fans saying that Notre Dame's O-line is undersized compared to what they play in the SEC? It is. It is undersized compared to what they play in the SEC. That doesn't mean anything. So, I mean, that doesn't tell you that they're going to be good or bad, So we'll see how it goes. But Ohio State just wasn't very big. They maybe had 1 or 2 300-pounders in their rotation. That's it. They were good size, but again, A&M is a whole different animal when it comes to size. Jim Haller and Biso hold the young offensive line shocks everyone by winning the line of scrimmage with their aggressiveness and tenacity. I hope you're right, Jim. I mean, I can't buy it. I'm not taking the pure homer takes today. I'd love to buy that, but I've got to see it. They got to show it to me that they can win the line of scrimmage. I think they can hold their own. I do think they can do that, but win the line of scrimmage, that's going to be tough. Madges, 16, Biso hold. Gerby Lambert is too good to keep off the field. He sees significant action by the Florida State game. I'll buy that. I hope that, and part of the premise of the question that I couldn't fit on the screen was that it's not related to injury. I could buy that. Part of me hopes that doesn't come true, because if that doesn't come true, it means that the tackles play really, really well. And obviously that would be ideal. But if Gerby Lambert forces his way into the starting lineup by the Florida State game, that's not a bad thing either. It means he's really stepped up and he's playing at a high level. AST 12321. The left Biso, the left side of the offensive line will not stand out as an obvious liability on Saturday. I'll buy that. That's kind of wishful thinking, but I'll buy that. I'm sorry. Did you seriously just say in the chat, Andrew Gilmore, did you just reference the Three Amigos scene with Plethora? One of my favorite scenes of that movie, by the way. Great movie. If you haven't seen it, you've depriving yourself of real comedy movies. But that's a great scene. I would like to know that if you tell me I have a plethora, that you know what plethora means. Great scene, by the way. So thank you for that, Andrew. It kind of distracted me a little bit when I saw, have you seen Three Amigos? Great movie. And if you haven't seen it, go watch it, because it's one of the all-time classic comedies. John Lacey with a Biso hold. Riley Leonard is the dynamic QB that Notre Dame has so desperately needed, and leads this team to a win at College Station by putting the team on his back like a Kyron Williams type of player. Absolutely buy that. Reese's Chris, Notre Dame minus 12.5. My score will not get you to that, so I'm gonna sell that. I do predict Notre Dame will win. I've said that for a while, but I don't I don't predict it'll be by more than that. So I'm going to sell that. Bison hold and upset, the same impact as Florida State will happen this weekend. So a ranked team gets beat by an unranked team. That's good, but not shouldn't have won that game. Let me go to the scores this week, because off the top of my head, I can't. I mean, would West Virginia beating Penn State be the same as? And I'm asking this genuine question. I want you guys to give me your answer. If West Virginia beat Penn State at home, would you count that the same as Georgia Tech beating Florida State? I mean, they're unranked and Georgia Tech was unranked. Penn State's ranked higher than Florida State. On paper it would seem so, but would you all consider that a bigger upset than Georgia Tech beating Florida State? Would Florida beating Miami be on the same par as that, even though Miami's ranked lower? I mean, look, Bama's going to crush Western Kentucky. Ole Miss is going to beat Furman. K-State's going to smash UT Martin, Idaho. I mean, there's not a lot of opportunities. Maybe could a Fresno State beat a Michigan? It's highly unlikely. And then, could maybe Boston College upset Florida State again? Well, if Boston College upsets Florida State now, then it won't be considered as big of an upset because they will have lost the other one. So I would say, I'm going to say no, there won't be, because I don't think West Virginia will beat Penn State. But the game is at Penn State, or at West Virginia, by the way. It's a home game for West Virginia. I don't know that I consider that as big of an upset. Yeah, I don't know if I can say, but that's close. That's close. And the last one from Reese's Christ, 3 big buy or sell, 3 or more Big Ten teams lose this weekend. Boy, that's a man. I don't know that I can go with you on that one. So let's go see here. So we got Rutgers versus Howard. That's a win for the ACC Big Ten. North Carolina at Minnesota. That's a possible loss for the Big Ten. Illinois plays Eastern Illinois. No chance. Michigan State plays Florida Atlantic. In my opinion, no chance. Wisconsin plays Western Michigan. No chance. Penn State plays West Virginia. That's possible. Iowa plays Illinois State. No chance. UConn at Maryland. I mean, I guess there's a chance, but I would say probably unlikely. But, that's a potential third one. Indiana State at Purdue. No chance. Akron at Ohio State. No chance. FIU at Indiana. No chance. UTEP at Nebraska. No chance. Miami, Ohio at Northwestern. Possible. Idaho at Oregon, no chance. Fresno at Michigan, maybe. UCLA at Hawaii, maybe. Weber State at Washington, no chance. USC at LSU, yeah. So there's at least enough games there where I would say there's a chance they lose 3 or more. I'm not predicting it, but there's a chance. There's a chance. So I'm going to sell it, but it's more possible than I thought, kind of thinking about it at the top. So, all right, let's add one more person to the bye-bye list. Okay, adios. Law Dog, buy, sell, hold. Notre Dame will be +2 in turnovers for the A&M game. Boy, I hope you're right on that one. I'm going to buy that one as wishful thinking. That's what I'm going to do there. And then buy, sell, hold. A&M's best defensive player is from Purdue. If A&M were named Purdue with the same similar talent, many would be so worried about this game. Many wouldn't be so worried. Well, I'm gonna buy that, because what you're saying was if they had similar talent, but the first thing doesn't go with the second thing. Just because Nick Scourton came from Purdue doesn't mean he's joining a roster that has comparable talent top to bottom, because he doesn't. He's joining a more talented roster. Now, Purdue had a couple good players on their team last year. Dylan Thieneman was All-American, and I, for the life of me, cannot remember the name of the linebacker who actually led their team in tackles for loss last year. Give me a second. I'm going to look that up. He's actually back this year. They moved him to inside linebacker. He played on the edge last year. Kyron Jenkins had 15.5 tackles for loss last year. He's a nice player. But the overall talent of that football team is not what Texas A&M's was. If Texas A&M had the same roster as Purdue, I still don't think people would be as worried about this game, because the overall talent wouldn't be as good. Now, I actually kind of like what Purdue did this offseason. They had a lot of portal guys that I like. Now, we don't know how quickly they're going to adjust, but they got some kids from Georgia that CJ Smith is a really fast receiver that Notre Dame went after for a minute when he was in high school. So, they'll be a better team than they were, but they're still not a game that people are concerned about. But to your point, if they did have the same exact roster, if if Purdue had the same exact kids that A&M had. So like I'm going to sell the actual thing that you that you brought up as far as like the first part of it. The second part of it is if A&M and Purdue, if A&M was if Purdue had the same roster that A&M had, if all the kids from A&M got transferred to Purdue, would Notre Dame fans and would the media be as worried about this game? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They would not be, no. Because, look, there's a lot of people that care more about the name of the jersey or on the helmet than they care about the quality of the team. I made a point on the board. I said Notre Dame doesn't win games like this. I'm like, yes, they win games like this all the time. And I pointed out how Notre Dame has 7 wins the last few years. They won at North Carolina, a 9-win team 2 years ago. They won at a ranked Syracuse team 2 years ago. They won at a ranked an NC State team last year that was unranked when they played, but spent half the year ranked and is in the preseason top 25 team again this year. Notre Dame has won plenty of games like this. And then Duke last year, and somebody's response was, Duke and Syracuse aren't Texas A&M. And my answer is based on what? Based on what? The last 2 years, Duke has gone 17-9. The last 2 years, Syracuse has gone 13-12. The last 2 years, A&M's gone 12-13. So based on what? They have an SEC patch on their jersey and they have Texas A&M on their helmets. That's basically what it comes down to. That's where the perception comes from. So if Purdue had the same roster that A&M had, no, people would not be as concerned about this game. But it would be the opposite mistake. People would be discounting Purdue because they're Purdue and not giving enough credit for the talent that they do have. They would not be talking about Purdue as having one of the best D-lines of college football, the way that they are A&M. They'd be wrong in doing so. They would not be talking about A&M having a very underrated, unproven but underrated backfield, like I think that they have with Connor Wegman and Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels in this Colin Klein system. They would not be giving them that same type of credit because they beat Purdue. They would be incorrect. They would not be talking about Torian York as a potential breakout star linebacker because he'd be at Purdue, and they'd be incorrect. So it's a double-edged sword because, no, people wouldn't be as worried about this game, but Notre Dame fans would just assume they're going to win and give them no credit. And then if it was a close game, like I do think this game will be, then the angst would be, oh, I can't believe you barely beat Purdue. So, yeah, it would not be the same amount of worry, but I think the mistake would then be on the opposite end of what they're doing now. Is right now they're worrying unnecessarily. And then if on the other side is they would be unnecessarily dismissing Purdue. And I think that would be a similar mistake to what they're doing now, which is this angst that, how's Notre Dame possibly going to win this game? Connor Fitch, by the end of the season, we will be looking at Sam Pendleton, Ashton Craig, and Billy Shrout as a top 10 trio in college football. I hope you're right. I think it's possible. I kind of felt like if Rocco Spindler won the starting job at guard, I felt that way. I absolutely did. I've said so. I think Ashton's very good. I think Billy's very good. I thought Rocco was going to win that left tackle job, and that inside of your line is going to really carry the day this whole season. And the reality is Sam Pendleton beat him out. And so now you go into the season with a guy that I thought had a chance to be a pretty good player, and he got beat out by another guy. Whatever the circumstances is, the coaches felt that he outplayed him. So I don't think that diminishes my thoughts. If Pendleton was playing because Rocco got hurt, then I would say, okay, maybe not. But in their eyes, he outplayed him. And so it's hard for me not to think that, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I'm with you. Now, tackle, we'll see how the tackles are. But inside, I agree with that, Connor. Shelton Hagar. Hey, man, it's been a long time, Shelton. Good to see you. Really good to see you with the post. Buy one, sell one, hold one. If you're the head coach, make this pick for your starting running back. Buy a starter, hold his backup, sell his cut off the team. Goodness gracious. Tim Brown didn't play running back. I'm trying to think, is there someone else that I'm missing? Did you mean to say Jim Brown? Maybe? Let's go with that. Let's go with Jim Brown. So I'm going to sell Tim Brown or Jim Brown. If it's Tim Brown, he wasn't a running back, so I'm selling him because of that. And if it's Jim Brown, I'm selling him simply because I never saw Jim Brown play. And so I can't compare guys that I've seen play to someone I've never seen play. And so it's one of those things. I always say this, I can only compare people that I've seen play. Now, if you talk to somebody like my dad or somebody older, they'll tell you Jim Brown might be the best running back to ever play football. And I don't have a say in that. The numbers were phenomenal, but I never saw him play. So I can't tell you. In that situation, I'm buying Bo Jackson, and I'm holding Derrick Henry. So he's my backup. Bo Jackson was unreal good. And he was a guy that split time between NFL and Major League Baseball. If he would have been a full-time football player and stayed healthy, he would have done some amazing things. Amazing things. He was an unreal best athlete I've ever seen in my life. Deion, I know Deion played baseball. Deion wasn't the baseball player Bo Jackson was. I mean, Bo Jackson was a legitimate all-star baseball player. And if Bo Jackson would have committed to actually playing baseball on a full time, he would have been even better. But he was a significantly better player than Deion Sanders was, and other guys that have played multiple sports. But he was exceptional, very exceptional. And Bo Jackson hit 141 home runs and really only played 4 years because he got hurt in playing in the NFL. And yeah, he was very good, very good. So buy Bo, hold Derrick Henry, sell Jim Brown. All right. Let's go to D. Masak. I think I got it right this time. Thank you for the email on that. Note, Bison hold. Notre Dame has a running back exceed 100 yards rushing against A&M. Not a Bison hold, but curious as to which back you think would most likely do it. Well, I'll tell you this. I'm selling that they're going to get it back to 100 yards just because I don't think you're going to be able to run for that kind of yardage against A&M. And if one back gets to 100, then they're going to run for a lot of yards because I do think 3 guys are going to carry the ball a lot between the 2 backs and then also Riley Leonard. So I'm going to sell that. But if a back does get to 100 yards, I mean, who would it be? Oh, boy. If I had to predict it, I'd probably say Jadarian Price. I could see a situation where Jadarian gets to 100 yards rushing and then Jeremiah gets to over 100 yards total offense. Let's say he gets 65 rushing and 50 receiving or something like that. But if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with Jadarian Price. And part of that's just this is a game for him, that the stuff that he does well, I think will fit in this game. The other part of it is, we have seen a game where these 2 kids played together and it was Jadarian that had 100 yards. W Link, buy so hold. With the new OC, we will see a more aggressive style of play in the big games compared to the more conservative style we have seen in the past against top opponents. I hope I'm buying that because that's why you bring in Mike Denbrock. But I hope that Marcus Freeman lets him do that. That's my only concern is that, because I know part of the reason that past OCs like Chip Long and Mike Denbrock to a degree before and guys like that did kind of be more conservative was the head coach. And we've seen that from Marcus Freeman. He's played a role in the conservative nature in those big games. Is that going to change now that he has a different OC and a different roster? We'll find out. I hope so. I'm going to buy it for now, though. Walk on carry-off 78. Buy so hold. Assuming an undefeated September, Notre Dame will be 5 or higher in the AP polls by month's end. Yes. They've only got to go up 2 spots, right? And when you look at some of the games that get played early in the season, there's a pretty decent chance that at least one team loses that's ranked ahead of them. The weekend 1, maybe let's just say hypothetically that in week 1, Clemson upsets Georgia, something like that happens. I'm thinking of some other teams that are ranked ahead of them that might lose. There really aren't many unless it's a huge upset. But, let's say that, Clemson beats Georgia, or I know there's some big games in week 2. Notre Dame is 7, so Penn State doesn't have anything to do with it. Ohio State's not losing to Akron. All right, let's go to week 2 because there aren't any of those games in week 1. Let's go to week 2. I know that when does Texas play Michigan? Is that week 3? Okay, so number 4 Texas at number 9 Michigan. You could argue there if Michigan wins that Notre Dame would jump up, but maybe Michigan jumps Notre Dame potentially. But if that happens, then I still see Michigan losing at some point in time in the near future, maybe even in September, because they do play USC on September 21st. I could see something like that. Looking at other teams ranked ahead of Notre Dame in week 2, Georgia plays Tennessee Tech. All right, let's get down to here some more of these top. Wait, give me to the top 25, guys. I'm trying to get to the they won't sort it by that way. Okay, so let's go down. I don't see any other top 5 teams that would lose in week 2 outside of Bama plays South Florida. That's not going to be a close game. Let's go. Ohio State plays Western Michigan. So, yeah, not a lot of opportunities in week 2. Oregon plays Boise. I mean, maybe. It'd be a huge shocker. I highly doubt it, but maybe. Let's go to week 3. So this is now mid-September here. Let's see some of these top 25 games. Alabama plays at Wisconsin. Unlikely, but possible. That a team like that could get knocked off. We've got Oregon plays at Oregon State. Again, unlikely, but possible that something like that happens. So not a ton of games where teams ahead of them could lose. But if Notre Dame beats Texas A&M, and like convincingly, Georgia plays at Kentucky. Again, unlikely, but possible. So if you get into a situation like that, if you're going to jump in, you'd have to kind of jump in and because you dominated in that particular game. That's going to have to be the key. And there's going to have to be some upsets, like Ohio State gets upset at Michigan State or Oregon gets upset at UCLA, something like that. It would have to happen. I just don't see a lot of that happening. So if you beat A&M convincingly and you beat Louisville convincingly, is there a chance that Notre Dame gets up to 5 or higher in the AP poll? Yeah, because then only maybe one team has to lose. Maybe another team just doesn't play great, and then you leap them anyway. It's possible. Jace Whitney buys a hold. Riley Leonard makes big-time plays against A&M and quickly becomes a star for Notre Dame this year. Buy. Also buy sell hold from Jace Whitney. A receiver not listed on the depth chart makes an impact play on Saturday. So that would have to be someone that's either KK Smith. It would have to be KK, Cam Williams, or Micah Gilbert. I'm going to sell that because I need to see something from all of them. But it's possible. It wouldn't shock me. It's possible. But I'm going to sell that for now. Okay. Let's go to Irish Catholic. If Notre Dame wins at College Station, they head to Los Angeles 11-0. I want to buy that. I do. But I also am trying to be consistent. And I have predicted that Notre Dame would beat A&M. I have predicted Notre Dame would beat USC. But I also predict that Notre Dame will be 11-1. I don't know who's going to beat them, but I do give them room to lose a game. But I have a good friend of mine who in 2018 said to me before the season, I didn't necessarily disagree with him, but it was his idea. He said, if Notre Dame beats Michigan, they'll run the table. I said, okay, well, tell me why. He goes, he said, if they beat Michigan, it's a huge confidence boost. This team will have a ton of belief, and the schedule does not really have anyone on there that's comparable to them talent-wise. I mean, he was right. It didn't. I would argue that this schedule has a tougher slate than that one. I mean, after that game, you had at Virginia Tech, who was okay. Florida State was okay. They weren't great the year before. You had Northwestern, who ended up being ranked. Syracuse ended up being ranked. USC wasn't great. I mean, they had lost a lot of guys from the year before, so you expected a down year from them to a degree. I don't know that there's anyone on that schedule as good as what I think Florida State will be, or as good as what I think this year's Florida State USC will be, or even as good as what Louisville would be. So it was a little easier to run the table with that team than this one, but his point still stands that because he feels the same way about this year, that if they beat A&M, they're going to run the table. And his point is the same. It's going to be about. It's going to be about. Look, are you going to have anyone that's on your level talent wise? And his answer is no. And then are you going to have the confidence that you need to really go out there and just play at an elite level week after week because you now believe in yourself? And his answer is yes. And I can't really argue with that. I just have to stay true to my predictions, which is 11-1. But if they win this game, it'll certainly give them a great chance to do that, because I do think A&M is one of their 2 toughest games this year when you take into account timing, where it's being played, matchups, and all that kind of stuff. All right, let's get into some non-Notre Dame related buy-sell holds as we end this. From D. Troll Hunter, buy-sell hold, Florida State starts season 0-2, which is something he's been predicting all summer. I'm still going to sell that. I sold that they were going to lose to Georgia Tech. Got that one wrong. I just don't think BC is that good. Here's the difference between the two for me. One is, yes, I thought they beat Georgia Tech, but I said all offseason, I think Georgia Tech's a talented team. Boston College, I don't think is that talented. I think Castellanos is a very dynamic player. I just don't think overall their team is all that talented. I just don't, and I'm not sure how well Bill O'Brien is going to thrive with that kind of quarterback. Does he know how to use a guy like Thomas Castellanos? I don't think that he does. So I'd be shocked by that. I think that if they were going to get upset by BC, it would have been because they came in overconfident after beating Georgia Tech. I have a hard time seeing them lose both of those. That's going to be tough. And Mike Norvell immediately gets put on the hot seat if they start 0-2. But I'm selling that. Buy-sell hold, Clemson and Miami need to win week 1 to maintain the ACC's chance to get 2 teams in the playoff. I don't agree with that. I don't. Miami, sure, because if Miami doesn't win in the opener, they're out of the conversation to get 2 teams in. And I think there's two aspects to this, and I'm going to assume that you mean both of these. Number one is, if they both lose, now you've got 2 of your 3 best teams have losses, right? That's part of it. The other part of it is that if you lose 2 games to the SEC, then that's going to make it harder for your team to get in there and thrive, or to get into the playoff, because no matter how much you may thrive the rest of the year, you lost that SEC game, and the way that the SEC schedules are set up, it's going to be harder to get that second team. So that's kind of where I would think that you're going with that. So I still feel like, let's just say Clemson loses this game and then loses to Florida State. Florida State runs the table the rest of the way, beats Clemson, beats Miami, and then Clemson beats them in a rematch, and Florida State's sitting there at 11-2. I still think Florida State gets in the playoff. I do. If, let's say Clemson loses to, Clemson beats Florida State's 10-2, Miami's 11 or Clemson's 11-1. Their only loss is to Georgia, and they get beat by Florida State in the rematch. I still think 2 get in. Florida State gets the automatic, and I still think Clemson gets in. So no, I don't think that they still have a shot to get 2 in. To your point, it would be harder, but I still think that they get 2 in. And then buy-sell hold, TCU will win more ACC games than SMU this season. I'm going to sell that. I know you and I were chatting during that game on Saturday. I'm not overreacting to that. I actually like how SMU came back and won. But obviously I would assume you're predicting that TCU beats SMU. That's 1. And then TCU also would then beat Stanford. That'd be 2 ACC wins. Look, say what you want about SMU, but they get to play this year in conference. They get to play Stanford, Pitt at home, BC at home, Cal at home, at Virginia, at Duke. They will win more than 2. Even if they lose to TCU and TCU beats them in Stanford, they're still winning more than 2 in the ACC. So I'm selling that. Christopher Crosby, buy-sell hold, Miller Moss, 3,000 yards, 27 touchdowns this season. If he's their starter all year, he'll have far more production than that. So I'll buy that as a minimum, yes. Buy-sell hold, Ollie Gordon, running back at Oklahoma State, has his whole line returning. Buy-sell hold, he gains 2,000 yards rushing if they get to 14 games. I'm going to sell that because everyone on their schedule is going to be focused on stopping them from running the football. I still think he'll be very good, but I don't see him getting to 2,000 yards. I don't. And then buy-sell hold, Avery Johnson is the best quarterback in the Big 12. I'm going to sell that. It's not hard. I'm not selling it like with absolutely you're way off. I just think there's enough good quarterbacks in the Big 12, and there's some overrated guys, but like Shedeur Sanders is overrated. There's no question he's overrated. He's still a good quarterback. You know, just like there's this notion that I have a friend of mine who, if he says something overrated in his mind, that just means it sucks. Like, no, dude, I don't think they suck. I just don't think they're a top 5 team. I think they're more of a top 15 to 20 team. That means they're overrated. They're still a really good team. And he just can't equate like overrated with still being good. And Shedeur Sanders is overrated. He's still a kid that in a Power 5 league last year completed 69% of his passes, threw for over 3,200 yards, had 27 touchdowns and 3 picks. And that's still good. You know, he had over 30 total touchdowns. He rushed for 4 touchdowns. I mean, that's still good. He doesn't suck. He's overrated. He's still good. Will Avery Johnson be better than him this year? That's going to be tough. You know, KJ Jefferson's in that league. When he's healthy, he's a really good quarterback. You know, you look at Jalen Daniels at Kansas. If he's healthy, he's better than Avery Johnson this year. You know, you've got the kid at Utah, right? Cameron Rising. You've got Garrett Green, who I think's a tad over. You got Noah Fafiti at Arizona. There's some pretty good quarterbacks in the Big 12, in my opinion. So, and then what's the kid's name is at Iowa State? Becht. Isn't his last name Becht? Yes, Rocco Becht. He's a good quarterback. So there's actually really good quarterback play in the Big 12. What I'll say this, even though I'm selling your premise, there will not be a more exciting quarterback in the Big 12 than Avery Johnson. He will be the most dynamic quarterback in the Big 12. Will he be the best? No, I don't think he'll be the best. I am Tenzin. This is the last 2 right here. Yeah, you're right, DJ. Cameron Rising is not a kid anymore. That's a grown man. You are 100% correct on that, buddy. Absolutely correct on that. I am Tenzin. Dante Moore made a mistake transferring to Oregon now that he's spending 2 consecutive years behind more senior transfer quarterbacks. I'm going to sell that because, first of all, he should have never transferred. He should have never gone to UCLA to begin with. That was a mistake, in my opinion. That's mistake 1. But I actually like the fact that he transferred back. Well, I don't like that he transferred, but I'm okay with him transferring back, and I'm okay with him not being the starter because I think Dante has a lot of growing up he needs to do as a young man and a lot of learning he needs to do as a quarterback. And playing behind a guy like Dylan Gabriel, who is smart, who knows how to prepare, who can show Dante the ropes. If Dante is willing to be a learner, right? So, okay, Dylan's a starter. I'm the backup. I'm going to learn as much as I can for when my time comes. I think this will be a great year for Dante because he needs this kind of take a step back, learn, be a sponge, learn what it means to go about your business like a professional every day, learn what it means to study film the right way, to practice the right way, to prepare the right way, to make decisions the right way, and then let your talent take over. He'll still have 2 years of starting at Oregon after that and be pretty good, in my opinion, because he's an incredibly gifted player. With Dante, it's all up here and right here. And I think being a backup for a year and being out of spotlight might help him if he embraces it the right way. And so any young quarterback that's gone through the things that Dante's gone through and had some of the issues that Dante's had, I've heard some things about him in high school about, just does he process well? Is he a board guy? All those kind of things that say sitting behind a guy like Dylan Gabriel is going to be very good for him. And maybe his dad will get his head out of his butt as well. The Pac-12, the Pac whatever can be reborn out of any combo of Mountain West and possible West Coast FCS programs jumping to the FBS. I mean, it can be reborn. It won't be reborn in the same format that it was. It'll never be like it was. Let's say that they go out in the Pac-12 because it's still a thing, right? And they go out and they get, say, you've got Oregon State and Washington State. Let's say that they're able to convince Cal and Stanford to come back. And then let's say they get some combination of Mountain West teams with, I don't know. I mean, there's some teams like Conference USA has some Texas teams maybe, but let's say you've got Boise. Let's go best case scenario. You get Boise, Air Force, Hawaii, Fresno, San Diego State, UNLV, Wyoming, and let's say you poach somebody from somewhere that's pretty good, right? Or decent program, something like that. It's still not going to be anything like the league that had USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, all those type of things. There's no way. It'll be a completely different look, completely different. And it'll be the Pac-12, but it won't be the Pac-12. You know what I mean? It won't be that, in my opinion. So I'm gonna buy that. It'll be reborn, but it won't be what it was. Let's see. I have a super chats kind of pop up. All right, Chief Brody, super chat. All right, fine. Notre Dame wins 24-13. That ain't no guess. I know that killed you to actually say something good about Notre Dame, buddy. I totally get that, but I appreciate your super chat, and I hope that you're right. Your score is not going to be a whole lot different than what mine will be tomorrow. Let's get a little preview of that one. So, yeah, that's good. That's good stuff, man. It's a great way to end it. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I want to thank you all for being with me today. Made it through 3 hours. A lot of different stuff to talk about. Enjoy the A&M fans that were on the channel today. 5 o'clock tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk. I'll be back tomorrow for our Keys to Victory and prediction show, so you're going to want to check that out. Give us a 5-star review, folks, if you are still with us. We would love to appreciate that always. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. And if you haven't signed up for the message board, I'm telling you guys, you keep missing out. I keep having people, I waited long enough. Just don't deprive yourself any further. You're going to love what we got going on, especially next week when I release the film breakdowns and things that I'm going to be doing for post-game stuff as well. So definitely want to check that out. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. And thank you all so much for joining me today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.